as what's his name said. I can't even remember his name. Hello,
Bill
everyone.
O'Reilly.
Welcome
That's
to
Bill O'Reilly.
It was Bill effing O'Reilly. Fuck it. We'll do it live. Pardon me. Welcome to another episode of this is not Sunday. This is Thursday, so we're doing Thirsty Thursday. My name is Matt. Sometimes I go by the Grass Factor. My end, and I'm trying my best to be on my good behavior today because we have a distinguished guest, and it's difficult for me to demonstrate professionalism in public settings because I get nervous, and my default to nerves is to get silly and all that fun stuff. Anyway, alongside me, we have Ryan DeMay, Ray Ito. Gentlemen, how are you? And then out of left field, we are doing something that we haven't done, but we've actually been talking about for a really, really, really long time. And we have an actual, not just an actual turfgrass professor, but quite a distinguished turfgrass professor, and someone who has spent their career performing research. And this is how I kind of talked about it, when I was putting thoughts together in my head, was it's not just a research that is out there and known, and this is what I would consider very actionable, right? Especially if you're in, regardless of what sector of turfgrass you're in, whether that be residential lawn care, whether you're a homeowner, if you're in corporate lawn care, if you're in sports turf, if you're in golf, it doesn't matter. All of this can help you make better decisions while you're out there in the field, and making better decisions is something that I think at some point in your career in this industry, it becomes important to you, right? And when you're looking for a place to start, you don't really know what to do, and then you start seeing some research that you can really justify as doing better. Well, we're going to shortcut you there and give you a great resource from the get-go, and that would be starting with Dr. Travis Shaddox. Sir, welcome to the show.
I don't I don't know what to say after that introduction. That's like the nicest introduction I've ever had. I'm slightly embarrassed after all that.
Oh, you don't need to be. So, I think the thing about having a researcher on here, I think, in having somebody who really, I think, from a research standpoint, I don't know every PhD in turf that's out there, actively still working, not retired, all that, and I don't know that there is one quite like Dr. Shaddox in that he has spent a good deal of his career in academia, but also what many people probably don't know is that he spent probably about a decade in private industry, maintaining turf at a high level in various settings.
Yes.
So I think that real world experience, and I think it really does come through in his research and in his extension work, and I'm excited to learn about it tonight. So Matt, Ray, buckle up. It's our first PhD on the show, and we are all in the dump seat.
Oh, is it really?
Yes.
I believe that's
Yes, it
I believe
is.
that's
I'm the
accurate.
first. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We've
Good to know.
always dreamed of this day.
Let me just
the last
back up
time
a
I
little
got to
bit
see
here on
Shaddox
that, Ryan.
prom night.
Is that you're right, Ryan, about the whole 10 years in the industry, but in terms of maintaining professional turf, I only actually maintain turf in outside of academia for about a year or two on sports turf down in Miami. So I worked on a golf course briefly, but the only real turf maintenance where I'm taking care of 18, 20 soccer fields and football fields and all that stuff, that was only for about a year or two, just to be completely transparent here.
Whoa. Your humility is appreciated, but I promise it's not necessary either.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna start with just some basic questions, and then we're just gonna converse into this however it goes. And so first things first is I'm always interested to figure out why or how people got into turfgrass in general. I failed as an engineer. And I thought turfgrass would just be a great way for me to hurry up and get the F out of college and do something that I really enjoyed doing, which at the time was playing a lot of golf, right? And drinking beer and all the other things that go along with why you need to hurry up and get out of college as quickly as possible before you kill yourself. So why turfgrass for you? And then not just turfgrass. Why did you go from turfgrass to towards academia, a PhD?
Oh, well, okay, I'll be as brief as I can. I grew up in a little town in Oklahoma, um, and I didn't really grow up on my grandfather's farm, but I kind of did. I mean, it's not. I'm not talking thousands of acre farm. We're talking a very small farm, but I kind of grew up out there, and so I was always around that sort of work, tractors, and collecting fruit and vegetables, and all these things, and taking care of stuff. So I grew up sort of in that environment, and my neighbor I was in high school and well, let me back up. I was in high school and even before high school, I would mow lawns for the neighbors. And then when I was probably 9 or 10 years old back in the 80s, where, I'd walk up and down the street pushing lawnmowers and collecting $5 or $10 to mow a person's lawn. And that's kind of what I did. And then I kind of worked with some people at the church and they had their own lawn care business and I helped them and did their thing. And then it kind of just went on from there. And then it just coincidentally, my neighbor had got into OSU, Oklahoma State's turf program when Jim Bayard was there. He had just started, and he came home from college on I don't know holiday or something, and it was across the fence, literally my next door neighbor, and he and I were talking, and he had a brochure from OSU about this turf management program. I'm like, what is that? I didn't even know that existed as a profession, and that just got me interested in it, and I through a very long, convoluted story, I ended up going to OSU and getting a turf degree. And in my senior year there, I was getting ready to graduate, and for some reason, there was a turf physiology, or not turf, it was a plant physiology professor, and then there was a soil fertility professor in my senior year who, for some reason, I can't explain it. They just struck an interest with me and a chord with me, and I just took a lot of interest beyond what I think like a normal student would in those subjects. And I realized at that point I wanted to become a superintendent. I was a Carl Spackler fan, and I wanted to, do the superintendent thing. And my senior year, I was like, something else is going on here that I'm interested in. And for some reason, I can't explain it. It's kind of like explaining why you fell in love with your wife. Can't explain it. You don't have really any control over that. You just do it. It just you become convinced that this is who you love, and I became convinced that this is the topic that I'm interested in, and I knew I didn't want to go to be a superintendent in my senior year when I was already applying for different positions and looking at opportunities. And it's really really long convoluted story, but essentially I ended up applying to Washington State, Colorado State, and University of Florida, and I got into all of them, but I didn't realize at the time how school works, and it doesn't really work applying to a school, at least in ag, as much as it applies to applying to a professor in that school. And anyway, make a long story short, I got in. It's a whole mess of a story that deserves its own book probably, but I got in and ended up going with Dr. Sartain at University of Florida, and who did exactly what I wanted to do, and in terms of nutrients. And I was just really fascinated on how you even measure nitrate going through the soil. How does that even work? How do you know that phosphorus is going through the soil and into the plant? I just didn't understand how could this be possible? And and that's what got my interest. And I went down the road from there, and that's how I got in. So
It-
that's the
it's
short version.
so, but pretty. I'm not going to say early on, but you felt the calling towards research even before you graduated, right? So there wasn't like you graduated and you were like, you know what, let's go scratch the superintendent itch.
Yeah, no, I never had. Well, I did until my senior. Okay, I grew up extremely poor, very very
Uh-huh.
poor in Oklahoma. I don't want to keep score or anything, but it was you can't get much poorer than we did. And I read an article in U.S. News and World Report in probably 1989 or 90, something around the time, and it said people with a bachelor's degree over a lifetime will earn about $1 million more on average than a high school degree. And people with an advanced graduate degree will earn on average about $1 million more than someone with a bachelor's degree on average. I mean, some of the most wealthy people I know only have high school degrees and they own their own companies and gazillionaires and very wealthy and very successful. It's not always the case, but I mean, on average, I thought, well, I can play that average. I can probably do that. And so I knew the finish line was a PhD in my senior years about in undergraduate work. I knew I wanted to become a superintendent, and then it suddenly changed, and I knew, okay, the finish line's not this. I need to go all the way, however far that takes me, and it's a PhD in the world of academia. Well, as far as education, I would argue that PhD doesn't really mean much, to be frank. It's much more difficult to be a professor than to get a PhD, but it's just my opinion.
Well, that's why you're here, is to share your opinions, however they may fall out. So it's interesting that from the get go you're like, no, I'm doing the damn thing. I'm going to go get a PhD. I wish I had that kind of drive and desire, or forethought.
What do you do? You mentioned on the phone we spoke briefly where you do fertilizer granulation or something, right? Do you own your own business?
Very little fertilizer now. I do. Very little fertilizer granulation now. That was iteration 1. Now I just do contract granulation, and so believe it or not, a lot of what I do is companies that have found homes for various waste streams, either byproducts of renewable energy or byproducts of or waste streams from even like leavening agents, right? Which, obviously calcium phosphate's oftentimes used. And then, we'll do the R&D aspect, and then up to a certain scale, granulation of those products to be able to be introduced into the marketplace and then pass it on to someone else that likes to do it at a really, really big scale where they're doing 30, 40,
but you own the
tons a
company
year.
that does that.
Yes.
Maybe we should back it. Okay, so you own your own company. What about Ryan? What do you do for a living, Ryan?
I am you're fine. No. It's good to meet and introduce. So, I own a consulting company that consults anywhere from Little League all the way up through professional sports organizations on how to design, build, construct, and manage sports fields. So, I've been in the sports surf side for about 10 years, and prior to that, I was in golf for about 16 years. So, my way up from a little guy weed whacking around trees all the way up to a golf course superintendent, and then I dipped out of that and went to sports turf. So, and then Ray, why don't you go next?
Ray, tell me about yourself, Ray.
Okay, what I do is deal with what Matt calls precision or high level, lawn and landscape care for residential landscapes. And that's basically what I have been doing for the last, I want to say, 30 years.
So you do that with your own company, or you work for a company?
Oh, for the first, I want to say, 17 years of my working life, I did that for a company. And then as of 2007, I became totally independent.
Okay, so you all three own your own companies and you work for yourself.
Yes,
correct.
I work for myself. Yeah, we all are.
That's the best. America's the best.
Owners.
I'm telling you.
Yes.
I'm a business owner, and so this whole issue of nutrient management, for example, I take a high interest in it. I take a higher interest in it than your average turf, grass, or landscape person. So,
what does IPM stand for, Ray? We kind of redefine this. Ray did.
IPM, my definition of it is I pay materials, fool. Okay? I pay materials because that's just how a business like mine operates. So I don't have the resources, for example, to waste work or waste materials because that just cuts into my bottom line.
Yeah.
So I pay materials is basically something that I tell people, and I even say that when people try to throw the other definition of IPM on me, which, by the way, in as long as I've known that word or that abbreviation, it seems to me that IPM has been twisted into something very different. It's been
Hmm.
twisted, and I take issue with how it's been twisted, and so
How has it been
that's
twisted?
what IPM, as I see it implemented, has been completely anti-pesticide.
I see. Yeah. It's well,
Okay,
as it's been implemented, but do you feel that's been that way in terms of the way it's been taught or instructed to those people, or the people who's received it has inferred that that's the case?
both, both,
Mm,
Dr. Shaddox. It's
Oh.
it takes two, because you see, if because that whole movement needs two parties in order to make it work. One, somebody with that agenda, and then two, on the other side, a person that is receptive to that agenda.
yeah.
So what I say to that is, no, in my business, IPM means I pay materials. So we are going to
Okay.
find the most efficient and effective way to get things done. And I don't
And
care about somebody's politics either.
I
Not
think that's a
interested.
perfect segue to start talking about some of your research. And reason being is like, and I go towards this. It, I was in lawn care for a long time before I moved into manufacturing. Manufacturing was one of those things where you just get you have. I had a midlife crisis at 30 years old,
Mm,
and
mm,
if that means I'm going to die at 60, so be it. I'm gonna live to the fullest. Damn it! But when you part of moving into manufacturing was really taking a completely different interest in the chemistry behind nutrients and fertility, and so, that was where I came across the some of your work on iron, right?
okay.
And I started going back through the years of how many thousand that hundreds of thousands of dollars I had spent on
Mm,
granular fertilizers and asked for iron to be in them, and be delivered in the form of iron oxide, and think I was really making a difference with what I was doing out there, right? And so
mhm,
when I kick this off and I make mention that you have actually very relatable and actionable research that we can all put emphasis behind, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And
okay.
for those of you that do not know that, I think I have an exact video about it. But if you ever come across a paper either from University of Kentucky or University of Florida, you will see exactly what we're talking about, and it's
Mm,
going to go through the various chemistries and derivatives of iron fertility products, and you get to look at exactly which ones elicit various color responses across different grass types. Well, I think you did Bermuda grass, and was it St. Augustine, if I recall correctly?
we've done well. The only thing we've published on is St. Augustine grass, I think. And we published a paper on soils, just the soil conversion that was in Soil Science Side of America Journal. I don't know which one you're referring to, but that one didn't have a plant component to it. Um, I, I don't think we published. I mean, we published in a public, what do you call it, a trade paper on Bermuda, but we didn't publish it in the scientific journal. So yeah, we've done St. Augustine grass, Bermuda grass. I think that's it. Um, but at the end of the day, I'm convinced at this point it doesn't make a flip a difference what the plan is. The Soil Science Side of America Journal uh, article, if you can Google it and find it, that paper is to me the nail in the coffin of granular iron in virtually any agronomic setting. So, and basically the nuts and bolts of that paper are if it's EDTA, DTPA, or EDDHA, which are three chelates, And by the way, the only 3 chelates that have been documented and elicited a turf response in university studies. But if it's one of those 3 chelates applied as a granular, then you will there is some solubility from those 3 chelates, okay, depending on the pH of the soil. But if it's not those 3 chelates, you might as well just take the money and take your crew to lunch with it or something. You're wasting, you're completely wasting your money by using those granular iron sources, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, those really, it doesn't matter if it's iron sulfate. Iron sulfate, you can get spray grade iron sulfate and spray it out and see a response in about 6 hours. Now, I was never able to show if that's actually a metabolic process or if it's just staining the leaf surface. I would argue it's probably a function of both, but probably majority staining the surface of the leaf. And so at the end of the day, I don't know if anybody really cares. It's turning the grass greener or darker greener, so whatever. But that same source, iron sulfate, applied to the soil becomes insoluble within an hour. Within an hour. And I think if we broke that hour up, based on my limited knowledge of the literature, if you break that hour up, it's more like 15 minutes. So there's no point. And even if it is soluble in your blended fertilizer, we have seen no evidence that a granular iron source, other than those 3 chelates, is of any value whatsoever in turf grass management. And even those 3 chelates, we use EDTA on Princess Bermuda. It took me 80 pounds of iron per acre to get a response from the EDTA. 80 pounds.
Isn't it interesting how certain Bermuda cultivars are very, very lackadaisical, I'd say, in response to iron or even fertility in general, right? So I'm gonna steer into like Tiff Tough, right? If I feel like it's just extremely difficult to elicit any response from.
Yeah, well,
that's just not wrong. And from based on field, observation, when you start putting down high levels of nutrients on Tiff Duff, all you get out of that is more clipping volume and not that much more color. And
yeah, we did a little bit of work with that down in Fort Lauderdale, but I wasn't able to really get the results I wanted before I left. But we had some Tiff Tough right next to some latitude down there.
Right.
Actually, you know what? We did publish a paper on that. We published a paper, actually came out, I think it was like maybe a year ago, and it had all the Bermuda grass varieties. Let me see if I can pull that up. But it had to do with nitrogen requirements of these different Bermuda grass varieties in South Florida. And it got published somewhere. I don't know. I'm sorry. I forget. I know who published it, though.
Pulling it up right now.
There's no way I can share my screen, is there?
It's
It's nitrogen requirements of deficit irrigated Bermuda grass, and it was published in.
Okay.
21.
Journal of Agronomy
2021.
and Crop Science. Journal of
Tell
Agronomy
me
and Crop
that-
Science.
Tell me that, for example, Tiff Grand rates rather well under conditions of an irrigation and nitrogen deficit.
Tiff Grand's in this study. To be honest with you, I haven't reviewed this paper in a while, so I don't. You probably could read through it and find the results quicker than I am. I didn't write this paper. I'm the second author on it.
I'm just
But,
saying observationally, Dr. Shaddox, that
Yeah.
Tiff Grand to me stands out as one of the Bermuda cultivars
Okay.
that performs very well aesthetically and functionally under an irrigation and nitrogen deficit.
Okay.
It's a very high performer compared to, for example, say 419 or Tifway 2. Other high performer, and I see that at the beginning of your paper, is Celebration. That's another rather high performer under nutrient and water deficits.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I only, I'm not a. It's kind of weird to say. I'm a soil scientist that happens to work with turf. I'm not a turf scientist who deals with soil. So I look at everything through the lens of the soil. So you all probably have forgotten more about all these differences in species than I'll ever know. In fact, we're writing a paper right now, and I sent it to the other author just today, and it has to do with all these different species on golf. So I was like, you're going to have to write some of this. I don't know all these differences between all these different grasses.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll take you on your word. I don't know. I do know that we seem to see these differences among Bermuda cultivars change based upon locations and times of year. So, for
I can see
example,
that as
the
well too.
perfect example would be like say latitude, for example, where it's or even Tahoma, where it's engineered or it's bred in a way that it's intended to be used in a certain transition zone of
Locality.
northern
Yeah,
climates. Yeah.
it's a certain
So
it's a certain locality. So that's
yeah.
just. However, here's the interesting thing. From my lens, is that the cold tolerant and winter hardy Bermudas in
Hmm.
my region, they happen to be performing very well in our so-called winter. And our so-called winter is short day lengths, cloud cover, low light conditions, in other words. And so that just is something where it performs well. It works well,
Okay.
and so I just want to put that out there where, yeah, some of these effects that they're bred for, you are right, they express themselves in different ways in different regions. I mean, that's why, yeah, for example, I do swear by some of these newer Bermuda cultivars because
Hmm.
Ray loves Tiff
unfortunately,
Grand.
yeah, I love Tiff Grand. I will raise my hand and admit to that any day. I mean, Tiff Grand is a beautiful grass. It's a lot more beautiful than Zoysia. There.
Dr.
Yeah.
Shaddox, I'm gonna steer us back into your latest paper, and probably the catalyst for why you're even on here.
Yeah.
And I think it makes more sense when even Jago commented. He said, I'm a soil scientist that happens to work with turfgrass, right? And I think that's it's pretty interesting how your latest paper kind of steers into that. If you don't mind, kind of give us a 30,000 foot overview of this, and I'm curious that from your perspective, what was your goal of this?
Well, first of all, before I go too far down that road, let me just explain the situation with this paper in general. Is that this is a result of many, many people working together, including a whole slew of people at the GCSA, a whole slew of people at the NGF, myself, Dr. Unruh. I mean, there's a lot of people who played an integral role in this work. So I'm on the front of the horse on the paper per se, but only because I wrote it. I mean, it's not possible without other people doing significant portions of work as well. So this concept of this work and this paper, it started back in 2004 or 2003, where the golf associations were interested in having some sort of benchmark number for water usage and then nutrient usage and pesticide usage and land usage and all these things, energy use. And so back 15, 20 years, well, whatever it was, 15, 16, 17 years ago, they sent out this survey, and they provided them an opportunity to see, okay, what is going on now in terms of the golf courses in the United States in terms of their nutrient use. Today we're talking about nutrients. And then they repeated that 10 years later to see if there'd been any movement in those needles, if you want to call them that time, whether it's nitrogen or phosphorus and so forth. And then in that study, the first study was done by Clark Throssell. I always forget if it was Throssell or Lyman. Lyman was involved early on in some of the studies, and then 2015, Pace Turf did a lot of the writing, and Wendy and Larry did all that stuff. And Wendy and Larry, I think, are kind of stepping into retirement, and this opportunity came around, and I think well, they can speak for themselves, but apparently they were interested in maybe taking a step back. And I think I may be wrong, but I think it was Larry that told me that he recommended Brian and I to do this project for the GCSA. I mean, I don't want to be incorrect on that, but I believe if my memory serves me correctly, that's what we kind of got recommended through Larry. So Anyway, we came in, figured out if we could do it. We said yes, we did it. And this was really the third iteration of the measurement of nutrient usage over time. We basically want to know, are management practices designed to, reduce nutrient reliance or nutrient uses? Are they working? Are they not working? Is there any association there? How has the nutrient use changed relative to course closures? How has it changed relative to behavioral changes and at facilities that are still operational? And so that's sort of a 50,000 foot explanation of this study, if you want to call it this survey.
Mhm.
From my understanding of it, I just got involved in the last 2 years on it, 2 or 3 years on it. So yeah.
So,
No, I
and
think that. Go ahead.
no, you go. You go ahead. I was going to derail us, but just for a second, and I want to get this out of the
Go
way
ahead,
because
please.
I know there's going to be a million times this just gets asked over and over, and I'm not. And Dr. Shaddox, I'm not saying this to pinpoint a specific product. I want to ask you because it gets asked over and over and over. The first one is, what is the best way to fix my soil? I have X soil
Mm.
in Y region. Is it humic acid? Is it carbon? Is it I insert some flavor of the week here?
Okay, so you want me to answer that question? So I get that
Yes.
question a lot too. And this actually might be a good time, JPink, for one of those slides, the pyramid slide. I didn't intend to really
Oh.
go into it right now, but the pyramid slide
Perfect.
explains this probably a little more visually than I can do it. The pyramid slide. So
Top one.
you'll find you'll think it's the first one. Go up, go
Very
up.
Yeah,
first
go all
one.
the way up.
So, or did I remove it?
No,
down.
I'm
It's in
looking
my-
at it.
Yeah, it's in my
JPink, you
slide
need to
deck.
download it and open it in. Are you looking at it in the browser, or did you download it and look at it? Is it-
Give me 5 minutes and I will.
Here, I'm just
Okay.
gonna I'm just gonna clip
Well,
it
I'll keep
and send it
talking.
to you.
Yeah, I'll
Okay,
keep
go
talking
ahead.
while you're doing it.
Oh,
So
yeah,
basically,
send him a
my answer to
screenshot.
that question, how do you fix my soil? My first response is, why do you want to fix your soil? Why are you convinced that the soil is the problem?
Oh my God, that's
Because
so
it takes a
refreshing.
lot
Sorry.
more knowledge and a lot more information for me to be convinced that the soil is the cause of your problem. Because the risk factors associated with turfgrass performance or quality, there it is. Fertile soil is the least important in terms of, well, not the least important. They're all important, but the least common problem. We got to look at water's almost always the number one problem. And let me, before I go too far, I'm gonna say things in generalities, but understand there's exceptions to the rules, even within a course, from yard to yard. But in general, water is almost always the problem, and it's more times than not, at least on golf, and even in lawn care, more times than not, it's too much water is usually the problem, particularly on putting greens that aren't draining properly. But it's not just too little; it's also too much. The light problems
little-
that occur.
Mhm.
I'm sorry. Go ahead,
Mhm.
Ray.
Okay,
Oh.
Dr. Shaddox, you are just hitting the nail on the head right here because I frequently get like this pushback from people saying, "Oh, but such and such person told me to add this to my soil," and I say, no. Here's what we need to actually fix your turf area: one, a
Yeah.
chainsaw, and two,
For the light.
yes, and then two,
Yeah.
a reconfig of this irrigation system because it's hideous. Putting magic crap on the ground isn't going to do it because
Ray,
that is
You're
that's what I'm
you've been
faced
in
with.
the- you've been in this game for a long time. Then I mean, I can't I don't like to use generalities, but I'm going to do it. And that is, you're in general, that's the case. Almost, I mean, more times than not, it's a water problem. And I don't mean just light from trees, but I mean light due to seasonal changes as well. Temperature due to
Right.
seasonal changes as well. The turf is a living organism that's growing in our environment.
Yes,
We as
yes.
humans, when a storm front comes through, we as humans, our body changes. We get colds or we get whatever. I mean, all sorts of things change. Imagine the plant. These things
Yes,
change
yes.
because it's living in the environment. And so the water, the light, and the temperature are
Mm.
critical, are absolutely critical. And in terms of checking off boxes, you know, those are key. And we can't do much about the temperature. We can barely do anything about the light. More, but be aware of it. Be aware of those factors, and be aware how those factors affect the stress level of the plant. Where now the plant is showing, um, uh, it's manifesting issues that it
Issues.
might not have occurred a month ago. And the only thing
Right,
that's
right.
changed, you go, well, so and so's neighbor's yard looks great, blah blah blah. Well, he has a tree on the north side of the lawn. Your tree's on the south side of the lawn. Your northern hemisphere. You're going to get more shade because your tree's on the south side of the lawn. Oh, I never thought about that. Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a variety of
Oh,
things,
right.
and I'm trying to get
Yeah.
to Matt's question, but I'm sorry. It just this is a topic I'm very passionate about. Is that I am a soil scientist by trade. I do this for a living, and it is
Mhm.
almost never the problem when I walk into a course or whoever, and I look at their soil test and go, "Here's your problem, and here's exactly how to solve it." That almost never happens. It happened. I'm going to show you I don't know. Is that good or bad? I don't know.
No,
But I'll show
it's
you.
hilarious because the number of times it's like, okay, here's my soil test. How do I fix my soil? And is it? Do you think I need to apply mycorrhizae? Do you think I don't have enough microbacteria, microbiology going on? How do I stimulate microbiology? It's a lot of these different things you hear, or maybe my soil fertility balance isn't adequate, right? And I think actually balance is
I have
my
a slide on that.
trigger word. By the way, like there's
What
nothing
is?
that
What's a trigger
balance.
Balance
Balance.
Balance
When
is his
when
trigger
people
word.
say just balance the soil, I had a
Oh.
rep tell me that one time after
My trigger
taking
word.
a look at a soil test. He said you just need to balance your soil.
Nice.
Mine is actually organic matter,
Organic
Okay.
Dr.
matter.
Shaddox. Mine is
Okay.
my trigger word is organic matter because honestly, if I were God, most of Oahu would get all of its soil pushed back up to the mountains where that soil originally came from,
Mm.
and all of that replaced with sand,
Okay.
not dirt. Sand. Okay.
And
Almost
why is
hydroponic
that?
growing mediums.
That's what you because the organic matter. Why is that? Tell me why that is. Because of moisture issues with the organic matter.
Moisture issues with organic matter, and the fact that the soil or dirt does not belong there. Because you see in Hawaii, at sea level, the natural soil media is sand,
Okay.
not dirt. Dirt occurs inland and at upper elevations, not at lower elevations. Sand is the natural material that occurs at lower elevations at sea level.
Okay.
Okay?
That's what you prefer.
That's what I prefer. Yep. I mean,
Okay.
and it's kind of a mind flip for some people because they say, "Oh, but you need organic matter and more CEC and all of that," and I'm saying, "No, we don't need that."
Who's saying this? The homeowner, or who is saying
Both the
this?
homeowners, and service providers, and the service providers as well.
What would be an example of a service provider that you work with? I thought you were the service provider. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
No, I'm talking about the service providers within the industry at large.
Oh, okay.
Okay, because they have bought the organic matter Kool-Aid. Okay. They bought it.
I'm going to pull back the curtain here, Dr. Shaddox, and let you know that in reality, where this stems from is that Ray has massive control issues, and he wants complete and total control over every input and every aspect of maintaining every piece of turf on every property.
Okay.
And soil introduces an unknown or a degree, a very, very, very slight degree of unpredictability, whether it be through organic matter mineralization or infiltration or whatever the case may be. And then but Ray wants the ultimate control. It's actually quite fascinating.
So
in your
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I was just saying back on the pyramid thing.
going.
So to answer your question directly, and it's really hard for me to do that. I kind of meander through my answer sometimes. But what do I do to solve my soil problem or whatever? I would say I'm not convinced you have a soil problem. So why am I trying to fix it? you got to check off 4 boxes before I get to that box, and those 4 boxes aren't the same size. Okay, those are much more prevalent or more common. Fertile soil is, I mean, I would say it's definitely important,
Minor.
but
It's
yeah,
minor.
it just doesn't happen as frequently. That's the problem. Now I'm going to show you a slide if we get to it, maybe towards the end, where clearly that's the problem. But it took me a long time to diagnose that. I couldn't just diagnose it from a soil. Well, now I can, but back then I couldn't diagnose from a soil test. I had no idea, couldn't figure it out. So I would just ask people to exercise some caution when it comes to valuing the numbers on a soil test. Okay, I'm becoming more convinced day by day.
Let's move into that.
Okay.
Ryan, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
Sorry. I was just going to say, just more of an observation, but if you take that, can you put the slide back up there real quick, JPink? Yeah, so if you flip that, invert it, right?
Yeah.
There's more to sell starting at the bottom of that pyramid if you invert that.
Ooh, yikes.
Work your way up.
Yes.
Oh.
Hot take, Ryan. But then that is true, because here's the reality is people are more apt to be willing to pay for some kind of magical additive for their soil or introduction of raw organic matter to their soil. But things change when, for example, you tell them you do not have sufficient light to properly grow this plant species, so you got to make a change. Number 2, your irrigation system stinks. Or number 3, your other factor is you are growing a plant that doesn't do well in the ambient temperatures of this area. And finally, like the last one that I see that I place great emphasis on is, you see where you have injury to the turf? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to be one of those lawn people or turfgrass people where I have weird eyes. I have cataracts. I have astigmatism. I'm nearsighted. But what stands out to my eyes, Dr. Shaddox, is after a mowing or a trimming, if I see shredded or torn leaf blades on the turf grass.
Well, you're gonna have to be mowing with a real mower or a robot. You're gonna avoid.
I'm going to be mowing with a reel.
Ray only mows with a reel.
Oh, you do?
That's the only
highly modified reel.
How often do you sharpen it?
Every week.
You hear that?
Every week.
How many hours are you putting on that mower between sharpenings? Man, good grief. I want to hire you.
Less than 20 hours. And then it gets backlapped and the bed knife gets refaced.
Do you limit, let me ask you this, Ray. Do you limit the number of customers that you deal with because they've probably been with you forever?
Yes.
Is that true?
Well,
they're afraid to fire him.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
The guy knows where I live. I can't get rid of him now.
Well, what I'm saying is you're taking, there's several business approaches, right? There's 3 fundamental business approaches, and you're taking the customer intimate business approach where you are close to your customer. You do a really high quality job from what I'm hearing. You take a lot of vested interest and time and passion and pride in your work. You're not the Walmart model where you're just constantly cranking them in and cranking them out, right? So you probably have customers that stay with you for a long time, and you probably limit them because your time is valuable.
Yeah, I limit them, and the fact of the matter is that I have people telling me, for example, they've never had to pay this much for residential lawn care in their life.
Yeah, and they probably never got the quality either.
No, but then the difference is that I answer my phone when they call.
Yeah.
And I also have a good answer should an issue come up. And, from the start, again, going back to your pyramid slide, right away, Dr. Shaddox, I deal with the issues that are at the wider part of the pyramid, right away I address those and identify them, and I don't take the approach of, for example, telling people, if we got your soil organic matter level up another 5%, you wouldn't have this problem. I don't tell people that kind of stuff.
Oh, good.
I know the majority of my contemporaries in the business do that to people. They do it.
Yeah, that's a shame. Yeah.
And then the unfortunate thing is that once that's done, I then have this unfortunate situation where now I need to get rid of all that organic matter in the soil. Or most of it. I have to get rid of it because it is undesirable. Because
I don't know. I don't know if I would want to get rid of organic matter on my end, but I do have a concern if it's too much and you're having turf related issues, probably due to excess moisture not being able to move through there.
Excessive moisture.
I don't know.
Because because the thing about soil is, here's how I look at soil, and correct me if I'm wrong. I look at soil as a place for the grassroots to go. I look at the soil as a repository for nutrients. And I also look at it as the reservoir of water. No more, no less. And so, for example, what happens when your soil, for example, is retaining too much water? What happens? And
soil?
When you say, and when you say water, excessive water, sometimes, for example, I can be faced with excessive water if it decides to rain for a week straight. Then I'm in trouble, or I can be in trouble. Right?
Yeah, you can't control the water. That's the reason. Yeah, there you go. So you can't control the moisture at that point. There's too much.
However, if the soil didn't have as much organic matter, and if it was mostly sand,
that's
all
what you
that
want. You want to
excessive
grow on the
water,
beach.
all that. Correct.
I don't blame you.
Sir.
There's a reason why USGA greens are made the way they're made. Is because the problem is the traffic and the compaction and the water movement. It was too much until the USGA developed that system. So
developed
it's designed entirely around water movement, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, because I always tell people, you can add water, you can add nutrients as needed, but what happens when you cannot take those things back or remove them or move them out of the area when there's too much?
Yeah,
when there's too much of it. How are you going to act when you cannot?
Good point.
Get rid of that, because, for example, here's our weather forecast for the next couple of days. I'm expected to get as much as a foot of rain, 12 inches of rain. I'm going to get 12 inches
another
of
week
rain.
in Hawaii.
Yeah, just another week in Hawaii. And so here's what I know happened. All of those turf grass areas that have excessive nutrients and organic matter that then get hit with that foot of water, most of them develop diseases. They develop diseases.
Dr. Shaddox, with this paper here, right? So it's obviously this is a survey that was sent out, and we're talking about fertility, and obviously with golf courses, we're going to see a little bit of native soil. We're also going to see sand-based growing seasons. Let's start here, and I want to start here because I think this is the something that at least a lot of people that tune in here because the first thing they did was they had a soil test done, and then they're looking for the next step of what do I do from this point? I have a piece of data in front of me, and I don't know what it's telling me, other than I've got a pretty bar graph here that's telling me I need to add this, and this, and this. But do I really need to do that? Well, let's get even more rudimentary than that, and let's start with soil test methodology, right? Because oftentimes what we end up seeing that's put in front of us is an ion exchange resin test, for instance. And a lot of times in ion exchange resin test, some of the things that aren't accounted for instance, is like the length of time that the ion exchange resin has been in contact with the soil, right? So sometimes it may have been in contact with it for 6 days, sometimes it may be 2 days, limited, of course, by mail, and then the time to process, right? And so there's a certain factor of I guess a non-control factor that gets baked in there, right? And so a lot of times, whether they're like, okay, all right, I did that, and I've got these numbers, and then unfortunately, what we've also had other people do is like, okay, I'm going to send off this other test and have like a Malic-3 extractant used at Waypoint, and then I'm comparing the two, and I have wildly different answers. And then I went to a fertilizer supplier, and then they conducted a saturated paste test. And now I've got 3 different values that I'm working with here, and I don't know which way is up, which way is down. Let's talk from the most rudimentary level of, okay, if it is something I want to do, I want to know what my baseline fertility level is, so I can see that there's nothing wrong with my soil, but maybe account for something that maybe I can plan my if I need to add potassium at all. I'm trying to run as lean as possible, as cheap as possible on my lawn. I know I can just run urea, but I'm curious, am I at 30 parts per million of potassium, or am I at 80 parts per million of potassium? What kind of soil test are you recommending? Where do you get started on this?
Okay. I'm just making
maybe not what you recommend. Let's talk about what you unpacked in your research first. Let's do that.
Well, okay. So you want to talk about well, let me first just say this.
Go ahead.
I don't really know why so many people soil test. It's bizarre to me that they. I don't know if it's been sold this way, or people have some sort of false sense of security in it, or I mean, if it's required by law, I suppose you can't do anything about it. But the soil test itself in turf in ag, it's completely different. They have mountains of gold over there, I guess. I don't know what they have, but they put out papers, seems like every other month, on calibration numbers and sorghum and alfalfa and stuff. But we don't have that in turf almost ever. So the numbers on a soil test for I'm talking specifically turf. Okay, I'm not going to get in trouble because someone said, "Oh, what about soybeans or something?" I'm talking turf. The numbers are almost meaningless except for pH and salinity and sodium. Some of those numbers that are soil numbers are not plant turf numbers, or soil related numbers. But you want to talk about phosphorus requirements and potassium requirements and calcium requirements and all these other things. I mean, I'll say this. I'm going to publish a paper in the fall on sulfur, on correlations and calibrations. I mean, this is what I do for a living. And I have almost no confidence in any of those recommendations on a soil test. Very little, with the exception of, like I said, pH and salinity and maybe sodium or something. Now, I have some general confidence on what sort of the ranges might need to be, but it doesn't. It's still not. I'm not that confident in them, and it's particularly recommendations. So you mentioned ion exchange resin and saturated paste. So ion exchange resin, I'm not convinced yet, but I'm becoming convinced that I think they will be of great use at some point in turf grass, in some point in the future. I do think there's enough there to pursue, and it's possible that the ion exchange may prove to be very valuable. But right now, it's useless.
And just real quick, ion exchange resin is so you're going to be able to capture both cations and anions from the exchange resin, or how exactly is that working there? Are you donating hydrogen in order to take in something that's soluble in acid, or how exactly does that work?
There's a hydroxides and hydrogen ion, positive charge and negative charge. I'm not a specialist in the development of these ion beads and so forth. So someone else who is a specialist and can correct me if I'm wrong. But basically, yes, you're going to exchange cations and anions in the soil for whatever cation and anion was on the bead. And the idea behind it is that it's more representative of what the root encounters in the soil, which is probably true. This philosophy has been shown to be valid and accurate in some ag crops, right? But in
That
turf,
it's mimicking exudates. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know if I would go that far. I'm not sure about that one,
Okay.
Matt. I'm not sure about whether it mimics an exudate or not. I would venture to say no, particularly if it's like a phytosodophore, maybe hydrogen exudates, but not like a chelated exudate. But I would venture to say, well, I don't know. I don't know about that. But it is intended to be more representative of what the plant would encounter and take up. Okay, that's the idea behind it. And there is, like I said, there's some meat on that bone, if you will, for ag crops. But what happens is they're able to correlate and calibrate that number in, let's say, soybeans or something. And so they know what it should be. They know the numbers because the soybean yield was X on this and it's higher and the yield went higher or whatever. They're able to do these things. We don't have any of these numbers in turf, as far as I know. I mean, someone can prove me wrong, post it online or something, but I don't know of any. So
in what you're saying is that if you have, say, for instance, your soil P level on an ion exchange resin test shows that you are at 20 parts per million. This is purely hypothetical here too. 20 parts per million, and everything else is within the range as dictated by this ion exchange resin test. But it shows that you're deficient in phosphorus. We don't have an NDVI rating or some other corollary to show that this is actually where we have crossed a critical threshold that is going to decrease performance. Therefore, it should be added back into the program. Is that what you're saying? We don't have that.
I'm not aware
that data.
of it. I'm not aware.
I
I'm not aware of
think
any
we do either.
published work on that. So and I'm
Me
not.
neither.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's somebody's document somewhere on someone's file cabinet from the 1980s or something. They never published. I can't speak to that. But if it's been published, I don't know. I've never seen it. I've never read it. So I mean, like I said, someone could show it to me and I could read it. No problem. I would begin convinced a little bit. I mean, if there's some evidence there, but as far as I know, it's never been published. I've never seen any numbers to support any recommendation on ion exchange resin. So I have literally whatever the lowest possible positive number. That's the confidence I have in an ion exchange resin.
Okay, Dr. Shaddox.
Yeah.
That's like
Can we
sentiment.
Is that a testimonial? Can we print that?
I was trying to actually visualize the lowest possible positive number, and I got a lot of zeros behind it.
Somewhere there's a mathematician in Cambridge that's going to work that out tonight.
Okay.
And so,
and the same thing goes for
Dr.
saturated
Shaddox,
paste too. I'm sorry, Ray. Go ahead.
So there's no calibration on saturated paste either, where we don't know what those critical thresholds are.
There is for boron on corn or something somewhere in Iowa. I can't remember.
Corn or soybeans or cotton, some kind of an agricultural crop.
Something like that.
Something like that. Because, to kind of lead up to my next question, as part of my academic career, I literally learned the deficiency symptoms, visual deficiency symptoms on both a monocot and a dicot plant. I learned that.
Okay.
And so to this day now, I use that daily. I use that knowledge daily. And the reason why I use that knowledge daily is, and this is where it gets into an issue, is I then have various people telling me, okay, if you have X in the soil, then you shouldn't be deficient. You shouldn't need anything. However, why am I then seeing visible and obvious deficiency symptoms, for example? And so there's something that applies, I I suppose, to all biological things, medicine included, is you do not treat numbers. You also treat what is actually happening right before your eyes.
Yeah. So Ray, let me expand on that a little bit, because this is critically important. I don't know if they set you up for this or not, but you hit a topic I want to go over. And that is so Ray's point was basically these numbers are numbers, but what are you visually seeing? Basically what you're saying, Ray, is if are you observing some issue with the turf, or are you not? Are you seeing the turf perform well, or are you not?
Yes.
And that's key. That's critical. The only, I have a slide, I didn't send it to you, but basically it's a quote, and it basically says this: if your turf grass is performing to your acceptable standards, I don't care if you want to call it quality, I don't know if you want to call it yield or growth rate, whatever your acceptable standards are, if it's performing acceptable to you and there's no prior condition, pre-existing condition, then there's no reason to soil test. No agronomic good reason. I'm not talking about all the different policies and all the HOA requires this and
politics
require that.
Yeah, the politics, yes. Right.
Yeah,
You don't want to get
I
into
can't
the
handle
politics.
that. I can't control that. You got to do what you got to do. If Miss Jones is going to fire you because you don't take a soil test, then go take a soil test. I mean, what are you going to do? But agronomically, there's no good reason to soil test if your turf's performing well and there's no prior or pre-existing condition. I mean, it makes no sense. And so, if you're soil testing, barring legal issues and the requirements by law and all other stuff, if you're soil testing, it should be to diagnose a turf grass issue. And that's your point, Ray, is what I think you're trying to say, is that what is your turf? What are you observing? If you're observing a problem that you've already checked off, you've already gone through the checklist of water, light, temperature, injury, and you're not convinced that it was any of those, then a soil test can help guide you as to maybe outliers and extreme values, low or high values that might give you an indication. And I'm going to show you an example of that maybe towards the end, where it was I couldn't figure it out. And then the soil test is what helped guide me. And the whole time I'm trying to diagnose a turfgrass problem. We get lost in the soil numbers. The soil numbers, can you cuss on this channel?
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah.
The soil test means jack
God,
shit.
I feel so much fucking better.
Okay, it doesn't mean anything unless you're diagnosing a turfgrass problem. Forget the numbers on a soil test. Look at the turfgrass first.
I want to play devil's advocate here and push back on you just a bit. And so I'm going to phrase it like this, and I'm going to come from the lawn care world where you're doing, say you're doing 400 different yards a year, right? Okay. And you are strategizing what you're going to be applying the next coming year, right? And to make the most informed decision you possibly can about what you're going to be buying, do you think in that particular instance, as a preventative measure, to make sure that you're not going to be running into any outliers, that in that particular instance, going ahead, conducting a soil test to be able to say that, okay, I can avoid 3 problems on these particular lawns because I'm at 18 parts per million of potassium.
Okay.
Let me get in front of it.
Okay, so I'm going to go into the doctor with my 11-year-old son, and the doctor's going to say, we need to do a bone marrow biopsy on your 11-year-old son. Why? He's healthy. Well, we just want to do it to make sure there's no deficiency there. There's no problem with his bone marrow. He would lose his license. Okay, now if you do it on me, I have health issues, and they do it on me, I have a pre-existing condition, and I've had that done. It hurts like hell. Okay, but there's a reason why. There's a good reason, and I have a pre-existing condition that requires regular evaluation, regular measurements. But my son is perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with him. So what? So why would you go down these roads? And the sort of the, I don't know, down the road issue is you're developing bad habits with you and your subordinates who are following your management practices. I'm talking specifically about like assistant superintendents who are getting these practices from the superintendent, who's a very successful superintendent, and he takes a soil test. He doesn't do anything. He sticks it in his file cabinet. He doesn't use it. Well, then the assistant superintendent goes to his course, and now he's a superintendent, and now he does the same thing over and over and over. And we don't have good evidence-based reasons to perform these practices. And then the next thing is, okay, well, now I'm going to move away from soil tests. I'm doing, well, I don't want to use any company names, but I'm going to use this new machine because I heard it works. There's no evidence to support it, but I'm going to use this new machine because now the mindset is I'm not basing my decisions upon turf grass quality, performance, and evidence that supports or doesn't support that. We're just basing it on, well, what's going to happen, and it could be this or it could be that. When soil testing is done, it should be when there's a pre-existing condition that you're trying to keep track of. Like let's say you had a phosphorus deficiency, or you have a organic matter example. Say you have a huge organic matter problem for some reason, and you want to keep track of it over time, see if it goes down because the turf grass isn't performing well because of that. And those are good reasons. But I'm not convinced that we should soil test just to see what the number is and maybe put something in the fertilizer so we don't become, it's not deficient in it. I'm not convinced that's the case. If the turf grass is fine, the turf grass is fine. We don't need it.
I'm going to introduce another variable here. So the variable specific to lawn care is that obviously the more issues that show in the lawn through the course of the year, the greater the pressure on the business owner, right? Because basically every for lack of a better word, every fuck up that occurs through the course of the year, that's one more derogatory mark against you, right? And this is why I'm pushing the preventative aspect of it. And I'm not saying it's something that every month you need to get out there and do it. Every year you get out there and do it. I think you could legitimately get away with every 5 years. But the reason being is that if you could exclude that one potential derogatory mark on the front end, would it not make sense to go ahead and at least just get that out of the way for ease of mind?
Well, maybe I misunderstood. Are you talking about like you show up on a property, you have no idea what's there at all? Is that what you're talking about the first time around? Okay, so maybe I misunderstood your question then. I mean, there is some, okay. Let me back up. If that's what I misunderstood you. If you have no clue what's going on there, then you don't know if the turf is performing to your expectations. Let's say you took the turf out and you put a new turf in, should I soil test? Well, is the turf performing to your expectations? It's not growing at all. You don't have any frame of reference as to what it should be and shouldn't be, and how's it growing from last month, last year, or 2 years ago. You have no frame of reference. So in a new setting, that falls under my definition of what a good reason is that you soil test only when you have your turfs not performing to your expectations. And in the case of a new lawn or a new golf course or a new football field, and you don't have any numbers at all, you don't have any idea how the turf is growing, then that would fall into that category, and that would be, I feel, a valid practice. At least see what you're dealing with.
A perfect example of ask bad questions, get the wrong answer, because I left that part out. That establishing a baseline, where it's a new property to you. You're trying to figure out where to start, and I'm going to parlay this into a little bit further. And is going to get into the business management side of things, and obviously I don't expect you to be able to just jump into this, but I'm looking for a safe starting point, right? You show up, and a lot of times, like for instance, you show up on a property, there's an inherent cost to that, right? To turn on your truck, you're paying insurance, fuel, all that fun stuff, time, and so a lot of times, there's something should be done to generate revenue per stop. And yes, you could say that, okay, just the soil sample itself, bill for that. But a lot of times if you're out there, right, they want that instantaneous feedback, some sort of instant gratification, right? And if you're going to start with fertility on a lawn that you really don't know anything about, would a nitrogen only approach be wise, or is it not doing anything at all to start until you have some sort of data set? Should you start with some sort of special ratio of 4:1:2 or 1:1:1?
Okay, great question. So I'm going to use this question to parlay it into my next sort of interest, my most recent interest, and that is the. Let me run a hypothetical with you guys. Let's put them all back on the screen here, JPink. So let's run a hypothetical. So I'm going to try to get everybody to agree even though I know we all are human, we all can't agree on the same thing all the time. But I'm going to do my best to get everybody to agree to the same thing here in a second. Okay, first time ever, maybe. So I'm going to hypothetically at first. Let's. I'm not asking you to do this. This is the hypothetical part. Let's all hypothetically agree that we all maintain lawns or golf courses or sport turf or whatever, sod farms, and hypothetically, we're not going to apply anything at all. No nutrients whatsoever. No nitrogen, no phosphorus, nothing. Okay, let's say we hypothetically all agree that that's what we're doing. No, we're not. Ray, I know you sound like you're a control person. You say I'm not going to apply anything, none. Okay, so let's just put that as a given. We all agree.
Actually, you know what, Dr. Shaddox? That is what I do. That is what I
even
do.
Better.
At first,
Even better.
and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
It's because my typical situation that I run into in this dirt where it has no earthly business being is a nutrient excess.
Well, okay. Well, there you go.
So I got a lot of shit to get rid of.
Okay, so yeah, that's in line with what I'm talking about.
So, keep going with your hypothetical here.
So I'm not asking you to literally agree with that, but hypothetically agree there. Now, here's what I want to ask if we all can agree with this. Can we agree then, we're not applying anything, to only add to our program elements or items that we have a good reason to do so?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now,
I
all
can
we have to
agree
do
to
is define a
that.
good reason. Okay, so now all we have to do is define what is a good reason. Okay, so what is a good reason? So Matt, your question is it a good idea to just start with nitrogen or just start with nothing? Whatever. So what is a good reason? So I'm going to assume Ray has a nutrient-rich soil, or I may be wrong, whatever, and he realizes on Mrs. Jones's lawn that the turf's growing fine. He doesn't need to. It's growing at a rate he can't keep up with it. And he's not doing hardly anything to it.
Excessively.
Okay,
so then the thing is that I'm seeing where you're going with this, because what this means is initially do nothing, and you only apply or add as warranted to correct issues with growth and performance first, and then secondarily appearance. Am I right?
Basically, that's it. Yeah. So Ray, maybe we need to meet up or something.
Did it pass the eye test? If it doesn't pass your eye test, then start to add fertility.
So so there's superintendents who have the turf looks great, but it's not growing at the rate they want it to grow at. So they'll go and apply nitrogen. It makes sense. They want it to grow. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't have it grow faster, but if that's what they want, then they're going to have to apply a product to do that. In that case, we have really good reason to apply nitrogen. So we would apply that. But we have equally bad reasons to apply N and P and K and iron and manganese and magnesium and all these things in the blend with nitrogen. So that's back to your question, Matt, is that to me, and from my experience with these issues, when you throw everything in the kitchen sink, which is a blended fertilizer, NPK, iron, all this other stuff, you have no idea what's doing what. Okay, you might think you do, and I'm going to show you a picture of that at the end. But we can't identify what you really need and what you don't need, what you're really getting value out of and what you're not. So you might be actually getting something out of the sulfur, and you would have no idea because you're applying magnesium sulfate, potassium sulfate, and iron sulfate, manganese sulfate, and all these other things, and you think it's because of the magnesium. But it's not. In fact, it happened to be because of the sulfur. But you didn't know that because there's so much other junk in it. So start with nitrogen. The odds are pretty good. You're probably going to have to apply nitrogen. I mean, that's just reality. That's what we're in. And then if it's growing to your acceptable standards and it looks fine and everybody's happy, you don't need to apply anything else. Okay. It's only when you observe, I don't know if Matt or Ray said that, it's only when you observe something, you observe your turf and it's not performing well at that point. You have nitrogen on it at the rate you like, and it's not performing well, something happens, and you go through water, light, temperature, you don't have a massive outbreak of armyworms or fall, whatever, the injury's not there. Okay, well, maybe there's a nutrient deficiency or maybe there's something else. And then you can take a soil test, find a deficient, whatever, and then add in probably phosphorus or something, or whatever, add one item in at a time until you see the turf respond. And if you don't see it respond, don't add more stuff in. Take it out. You got to do one thing at a time. And then once you finally dialed in, you might be okay. And the next question comes up is, I have a let's take up one of the major lawn care companies in Central Florida. I will leave their names out, but they have 1,000 units or whatever, and they're going out and seeing they can't have a different nutrient source for every conceivable lawn. It's impossible, even with on the same
But
truck.
they
The same
should.
truck seeing.
But they
Yeah,
should.
there's no way.
They should.
Yeah, well, but logistically,
should.
their argument is
Yeah.
it's very challenging to do that. I get that. Okay,
Well, bullshit. Bullshit.
but we still need to divide it down to the least common denominator. In other words, get all the junk out of it that you don't need for the what would you call that? I guess the lawn that needs the most stuff. Let's say it's NP and K that one lawn needs, but no other lawn needs iron, manganese, then leave it all out except for the NP and K. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So only put in the items that you actually need. So putting in one item, nitrogen, Matt, is what I would recommend. Stay with nitrogen, stay with soluble nitrogen. I'm leaning heavily towards soluble nitrogen due to the work we've been doing with the cost and things. And it's going to be a pretty boring program, but that's basically all you really need for most cases. And then add in one or two items only when you have a good reason to do so. And the good reason is the turf grass is not performing to your acceptable standards, or you have a pre-existing condition.
And I think one of the most overlooked things in regards to nitrogen is that nitrogen is going to facilitate everything else, right? So PK, everything else, and the majority of the time, your native soils are going to have sufficient levels of that, right? And so, if that's what your concern is, that's being into the plant, well, then apply nitrogen because that's what's going to get it into the plant. Ryan, I know you've got a ton of questions specific with the soil test and the paper. Let's start.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let's get into it. We're an hour and 20 minutes into this thing. I'm sorry.
No,
this is
we will
we
keep
go
you
on
for 9 hours because this is what we love.
Yes, that may well happen.
We are having a lot of fun right now.
Okay.
Yeah,
We
we're
are.
enjoying this.
Let's hit it.
Okay, so first of all, the survey. I'm super appreciative that you took this on. It's I think it's an important one. I think it's just one that hopefully whatever it is, every 5, 6 to 10 years, right, that we can continue this because it'll be important to see those trends and how they evolve right now.
Mhm.
And I think what'll be really interesting is to see, with the resurgence of golf post-pandemic, right, or during the pandemic and post-pandemic, what does that make the trend line do in some of these cases. So in digging into the paper, I kind of want to talk about a little bit of what you guys found, both in the survey data and talk about maybe trying to unpack it, make sense of it. I know that sometimes it's hard to do that. So first off, let's look at table 10. JPink, throw that one up there real quick.
I sent him one that had some highlights in it. I don't know. Yeah, this is the one I
perfect.
sent him.
Okay. So I pulled this one out too because we were talking about saturated paste right before.
Yeah.
And for those of you that don't know, so Dr. Shaddox, you're a soil scientist. Can you quickly, 30-second explanation of what a saturated paste test is?
Oh, okay.
In soil.
Okay, yeah. So basically, saturated paste is a test where the soil comes in. They apply a solution to this water, deionized water, to the soil until it becomes a paste. And then they vacuum that out and filter out the water, and then they analyze what's there. So the idea is that it's only what's soluble in the soil solution that is analyzed, not anything that's extracted off the colloids or organic matter or whatever. So it's only what's soluble. And the idea is the way it's sold is that, this is only what the plants have access to, and this is only whatever. And what I want to point out is put that table back up. That 47 should be 0. Okay, folks, it should be 0.
Thank you.
I said that down in Orlando. Yeah,
I'll say
last week.
Yeah, what they say after that? What did they say to that?
I don't know. I don't know if they were stunned or not.
Groans.
It was late in the afternoon. I think people were wanting. It was beer 30, and I think they were wanting to get out of the room. But it should be 0. Okay, and I'm going to explain this. The analogy I like to use is this. Okay, this is perfect. You all three are all private business owners. Okay, I'm assuming they're private. They're business owners. And you're going to go to the bank or somewhere and you're going to have to get a loan or some sort of money to finance the start of your business. You're about to start a business. Okay. You guys have been in it for years, but let's say when you start, you had to get money from somewhere, probably the bank. And let's say you go to the bank. What's the bank going to do? The bank's going to ask you for all your financial papers. They're going to ask for all your, all these things. They want to know about your wealth. They want to know, how are you going to finance this thing? And what they're going to do is, when you walk into that bank, Ryan and Ray and Matt, when you walk into that bank, that banker is going to say, okay, how much cash do you have in your pocket? And they're going to evaluate your entire wealth on the cash in your pocket, right? No.
No,
But
not
that's
at
what
all.
saturated paste does. They're going to, whatever wealth is in, whatever cash you have in your pocket, you could have $1 million in your pocket and be dirt poor. You could have $1 in your pocket and be the most wealthy person on the planet, because you have money in your bank, you have money in real estate, you have money in your kids' college education, all these other areas where you have money.
Have collateral.
Reserved. Yes. You have money and you have
reserves.
finances and wealth stashed in other areas. What you have in your pocket is insignificant to the wealth, your wealth. Okay. Your ability to pay your bills is, it's irrelevant what's in your pocket, so saturated paste is the same thing. Saturated paste is how much nutrients are in the soil solution when that extraction occurs. It has no ability to know what's in reserve in the soil. And that's the same thing as your bank.
And what is the extractant with saturated paste?
It's just deionized water.
Yes.
Yeah, just water.
Just water.
So,
plain water. Okay.
Yeah. So it's just water. And it has there's no way anyone can tell you from a saturated paste what is going to occur to your turf, or what nutrients will be available to your turf grass over any length of time. It could take that test that night. It could rain. Well, Ray's case is going to rain 10 inches. Take another saturated paste tomorrow. The numbers are going to be completely different. You had money in your pocket when you went in that bank. Yeah, you got robbed. Now you have no money in your pocket, so you don't have any money. You're zero. You're nothing. Well, you didn't see. I got $2 million in real estate and $3 million in, in other words, you have reserve, other wealth, not just what's in your pocket. And the saturated paste is only telling you what's in your pocket. That's it. Okay.
At that time.
At that time. That's it. And there's
mm-hmm.
As far as I know, there's no correlation or calibration. We have no idea what that number should be. We have zero knowledge. And what's sold is, this happened about 5 or 10 years ago, where the superintendents said, well, not the superintendents, I think they were being sold this, where they're saying, well, you should instead of using DI water, you should use your irrigation water, because your irrigation water has more calcium in it. Your irrigation
I remember that.
Yeah, it might use an effluent water, and the saturated paste might be higher because they're effluent. And so all these numbers are just coming in all over the place. And at the end of the day, guys, there is no, in fact, I just spoke with another professor just last week about this issue as well. There is literally zero confidence. Well, I can't say zero. Okay. Whatever above zero in these numbers. I have no idea what these numbers mean. Okay. Even I suppose it's possible somebody down the road may eventually see this on YouTube 50 years from now and go, oh, Dr. Shaddox was an idiot. Now we figured it out. No, you figured it out. Great. I'm all for that. If you figure it out, let's do it. But until we figure it out, I have no confidence in that number. That number should be 0 instead of 47. Sorry,
so
Ron,
let me ask you. No. That was a great explanation. So, can you talk a little bit? So, to use your analogy, which I loved, by the way. Now, let's say that Soil Lab or whoever says that, okay, hey, those other nutrients that aren't in your pocket, right? That other wealth that you have, it's in a blind trust right now. It's locked up. You can't get it. So
locked up. How do you that? That's a ridiculous statement. Okay, not from you, but not a statement, but it's
trying to trigger you.
Phrase.
I did it.
You were trying to tee you up.
Okay, this whole locked up stuff is nonsense. When you say when I hear the word locked up, I hear nonsense. But what it is, when it's chemically, when a product gets, let's use iron, when it gets locked up, what I'm saying is the iron actually converts from soluble iron 3 to iron oxide, where it's now a mineral that is not going to be soluble. I'm saying. So if you're going to say locked up like that, then yeah. But this locked up thing is complete. Phosphorus gets locked up with calcium. It gets locked up with aluminum. But it's not like it's going to suddenly become unlocked. I mean, if iron oxide is never going to become soluble again in our lifetime, okay, so it's gone. All right. Now, sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
He had to step away for a second. His son
Okay.
was
I'm sorry.
asking him to come hang out for a second.
So nutrients do get locked up, but the whole locked up thing is just the phrase itself is it's not a scientific term. Okay, it can mean so many things to so many different people. At the end of the day, if a soluble nutrient has become insoluble, then it is not available to the plant. Okay, but there's so many different ways that can happen.
But
Okay?
does that mean that the plant can never utilize it?
Well, no, not in every case, but with iron certainly that's very likely the case in most cases. But it doesn't mean it can't ever eventually get access to it. Particularly, let's say manganese oxide or something, or a more soluble oxide metal. Right, it's a little more soluble. So the plant, all these plants are growing out here in nature, Matt, and nobody's applying iron to the Amazon trees. Okay, and all those trees have iron. They're getting iron from exudus from the roots, either through photosiderophores, which are a chelate, or through exudation of hydrogen, from protons that reduce that pH down so low that they can solubilize some of that iron. But the idea of this locked up, I'm applying nutrients. Oh, my nutrients are locked up. I'm going to apply this. I probably read Ryan wrong. I'm going to apply this product, and it's going to make the nutrients unlocked or something like that. That's mostly nonsense.
Well, given the saturated paste, the whole locked up thing,
and I'm sorry if I'm saying something that you guys have said. I just realized you've said the opposite in the past. I don't mean to offend anybody.
No,
it's not.
No, we're
actually
teeing you up. I promise. A lot of this we're asking you because we want to hear it from someone else because a lot of this we learned from people like you, right? And so to hear it from someone else makes it all good. Because listen, everybody goes through a journey in their career, right? And everybody has been through a period of their life where they relied on someone else to feed them the information that they're using to make the judgment calls while they're out in the field, right? And a lot of times it starts off with having hundreds of saturated paste tests done. I'm buying 6 tractor trailer loads of granular fertilizer that has iron oxide blended into it, and I feel great about it at the time. And then as your career progresses, and then all of a sudden you're like, I did not know that. I thought I knew it, but I did not know that. And then that's kind of when it becomes fun, right? Because you realize that everything you thought you don't know a fucking thing, as a matter of fact. And so it's that second awakening, or midlife crisis, as I called it, right? And so I promise that's why we're asking you these questions. And it is there's nothing you're going to say that is going to hurt our feelings. I promise you, not at all. So do not worry about that at all.
And keep in mind, this is just my opinion based upon my knowledge of the literature. I could be wrong. I mean, I am wrong many times.
Your career and your body of work, body of evidence that you've gathered is more than what we're able to offer, and so therefore we're placing extra emphasis on your opinion tonight.
Okay.
Yes, your opinions have very high value to us. Yeah.
So, given the saturated paste is only accounting for the money in your pocket, if you wanted to see your total assets, which extractant should we be looking at?
JPink, pull up that slide again. I'm going to show you the extractant. So basically, it's a good question. It's a good question. So there's a slide that has all sorts of formulas on it and stuff. Yeah, this one. So these are all the extractants, pretty much everything that you're going to use. And the only reason I want to show this is that not because of, I don't remember all this stuff on the right-hand side. I don't know all that stuff. But the reason I'm showing this is that different regions have different
conditions,
different conditions. Yeah. And they have stronger correlations between certain extractants. So if, for example, you wouldn't want to use, say, a malic 3 in semi-arid West, where you should be using the Olsen extractant because it's going to extract less phosphorus. The malic 3 is going to extract less phosphorus than the sodium bicarbonate because the alkaline soil is going to neutralize the acidity in the malic 3, and it's not going to extract anything.
It's the other way around in that if you try to run an M3 on the calcareous or high calcium soils, which I have here in Hawaii, at sea level as well, what actually happens is that your phosphorus values on an M3 are going to be grossly exaggerated versus what the Olsen saturated sodium bicarbonate test extracts. And so therefore, For example, when somebody talks to me about a soil test from, say, Texas or Arizona,
Mm-hmm.
I then ask them, did your lab run M3? Because if they did, and they tell me, oh, but Ray, why is my grass turning purple
Yeah.
and not growing? I'm going to say, that is probably because that test that they ran is not reflective of your actual conditions. Run it again as an Olson, and
Yeah.
that is a clue as to why the turf is not performing at that point. So yeah, just to
Okay.
clear that up a little, because
Yeah.
I'm familiar with this table as well, and
Yeah.
why somebody would run a soil test extractant based on their existing conditions. And that's why actually I liked what you said about how the most important thing may well be pH and salt levels. That might be
Yeah.
your guideline as to what you need to do further.
Yeah.
Testing
So,
wise.
Well, this slide basically just shows there's different extractants. You know,
Mhm.
generally speaking, Malic 3 is generally used. It's referred to as universal extractant. I don't like that phrase, universal extractant, but it is the more common. You can see that on the previous slide, or the table from the, not the previous slide, the table from the article, where it is the most common evidence-based extractant. Okay, and I don't refer to saturated base as an evidence-based extractant. There's no evidence for it.
Thank you.
Okay,
Oh.
sure.
but Malic 3 is the most common one. But you can see all these different regions, even in the Southwest, for phosphorus. And the reason this is split out is because I didn't want to have a survey where it said nutrient analysis and include phosphorus in it. But I can't ask every single element on every single extractant. It's too much for a survey. So I split it out because phosphorus is really the element we're concerned about the most, I suppose, in terms of environmental issues. And that's the one that a lot of the extractants are tailored to. So like the Olson extractant and the Beret extractant and so forth, they're tailored to have a stronger correlation to what is in the soil relative to what needs to be in the soil to achieve a desired plant response. So that's the reason there's a phosphorus. So really want to look at the top part of that table where it says phosphorus analysis. And we do see that Olson is more common in the Southwest where you would expect it to be. And it's approximately equal to Malic 3, but Malic 3 is more common. It's the most common one across the board, pretty much in every region for the most part. I mean, the Southwest changes a little bit there, but and it's probably accurate, I suppose. It's probably good that it is, I suppose. But the 47, it should be 0. There shouldn't be any saturated paste. I don't even know when I ran these guys, I was blown away. I ran the stats.
Yes.
I don't know how many times because I thought I had the code wrong. I was like, this can't be. There's something wrong in my code. I'm not accounting for something, or I don't know what.
Actually,
but
I'll tell
it
you what the
was.
situation is. I'll tell
Yeah,
you what the
go ahead.
situation is that when a soil test procedure is coupled to a entity that is also selling their brand of soil amendments and fertilizers, that's when absolute fuckery happens. Okay, is that when these guys are, they're telling these golf courses, for example, run your saturated paste test, and then they
Yeah.
also have here's our catalog with all of these powders and liquids that you're supposed to be using. I mean, because I experienced that for myself as well, in that I got sold, for example, a testing procedure and a whole line of soil amendments and supplements to go with it. And of course,
Yeah.
me being a science-based person, I rejected it all immediately. I
Okay.
said no.
I'm gonna ask this too, and it's call it controversial or whatever if you will, but coming from you come from academia, and I'm gonna point at that. After from my education in turfgrass, I did not feel like I was equipped to make the appropriate decision by myself by even choosing the proper extractant, right? Like in the event I was going to conduct it, I didn't feel like I was equipped educationally. Now, part of that could be the beer drinking I did and all the other extracurricular activities, but the other part of it too is that I just didn't feel like there was and again, you being a subcategory of ag, right? That a lot of times you're trying to parse information from ag over to turf,
Yeah.
and it gets a little weird sometimes. And so my question is that in terms of academia and what's being taught to undergrad
Mm,
students, why isn't
mm,
there a greater emphasis on highlighting what is
yeah.
actually shit, bullshit, and versus
Yeah.
when you enter the real world and all of a sudden you feel married to a distributor because they're the ones that are helping you make the decisions out there because you feel ill-equipped.
That's a great question, and I'm ill-equipped to answer that question. But I will say I know there's one or two professors who do teach turfgrass science who do that, who actually show claims and so forth from manufacturers and use those as examples to educate their students. It does exist, but let me say this: is that I don't know the reason why it's not being taught, or maybe I think it probably is being taught, but maybe not.
I think more so now than say
Yeah,
2008, right? And
yeah,
I look at University
yeah,
of Tennessee and the turfgrass talent there now versus then. It's a little bit different, right? The program has changed
yeah.
significantly, a lot more money and all that fun stuff. But I'd say by and large, it's not. It doesn't feel widely adopted to me at this
I'll say
point.
this: I have the privilege of being married to someone who's an actual doctor, who her work actually matters. I'm digging in the dirt, and she's digging in people. But
Oops.
um, but in her world, I'm using this as an example. In her world, when they teach, when they lecture, generally speaking, this is the case at UF and the case here at UK, where when they lecture, there's a director of the course, and the director doesn't teach every lecture. Okay, the director directs the course, and if the course, let's say the course is, well, let's just use turf for example. So the turf is course is turf 101 or something, and the subject for the next week is turf pathology, and the director of the course is an entomologist. They wouldn't teach that class. They would bring in the pathologist to teach that class in my wife's world. Okay. They have pathologists and they have, all these specialists. Well, in turf, we don't always have the specialists in every category and
Yes.
every discipline of turfgrass. So sometimes the turf professor is a lone ranger out there. He or she's the only one there. They have to do it. And what happens is they end up teaching on subjects that they're not necessarily specialists in. They know it. They're specialists in some other area. And so I think that's partially why we don't get some of the, you know, information that we're looking for. I remember when I took irrigation when I was an undergraduate, I took ag irrigation because there was no golf irrigation.
Hmm.
There's not enough faculty to teach every subject in turf. But in medicine, there's people doing every conceivable area of the body, right? And those people come in and teach that specific lecture on, let's say, pulmonary disease. That pulmonologist will come and teach that lecture. And the next year next lesson might be cardiology. And the cardiologist come and teach that lecture, not the director of the course. And so they get the most up-to-date information from specialists who are doing just that. I do think it's a matter of just lack of resources and lack of funding and lack of faculty who, because of lack of funding to teach these courses is at least one reason, in my opinion, why we don't have the most current information up there.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I was going to say this is going to sound like I'm critical of Penn State, and I'm not. By all means, I love Penn State, and I love the reputation they have and the good that comes with it, and the exposure of turfgrass because of
Yeah.
Penn State. I think it's wonderful. But I'll parlay this into another example that if you have a soil test conducted through Penn State and you look at their potassium recommendations, an adequate soil level of potassium from Penn State is going to be 200 parts per million versus
Mm,
Spectrum or Waypoint or whoever,
yeah.
insert random lab here. Everybody has their own, recommendations. But why, for instance, a renowned turfgrass university, why are they recommending an adequate level of soil potassium as 200 parts per million? Is that even evidence backed? I mean,
Well,
yes, it that is an
yeah.
adequate level, but what in certain
I
instances
can.
could that be considered excessive or just
Okay. Well,
ridiculous?
let me give you a little background on how these things are generated. We're going to have to do this again at some point because I don't even know if we've got to the the paper that I really wanted. But that's fine. There's just so much
We'll,
information, so many good questions you have.
yeah,
Really good
we'll
questions.
move back to it. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. We'll do it again if we need to. No problem. the way the nutrients are generally recommendations are generally generated through an institution is probably the way it needs to be, and it takes time, but it's usually through a committee. It was at UF, still is at UF, and it still is here at UK, where there's a committee, a nutrient committee that meets, that votes on whether or not a recommendation will go through or not, and that professor providing that request has to have evidence to support it. Okay, so but some of the old recommendations got in before the committees were formed. This is going back to the 60s and 70s. Those just kind of grandfathered in and they haven't been changed. Okay. So
Yeah.
it's not usually one person making these changes. So, for example, in Penn State, with Dr. Schlossberg's there doing whatever he's doing, he may have whatever he's working on. And I don't know how Penn State does their nutrient recommendations, but generally it's a committee. It may be that he has to provide sufficient evidence to convince a committee to change the nutrient recommendations, or it may not be. I don't know that, but generally that's the case.
Sure.
Like when I went in front of the committee at UF and UK, I had to provide all this evidence, and they still didn't change the recommendations. They would not change the recommendations because they didn't have enough evidence to change it. Meanwhile, the evidence in support of the recommendations they do have is scant or none. So I'm like, well, wait a second. You're requiring me to get evidence to change it, but we don't have evidence to keep it. So it's just, there's a lot of antiquated old reasoning, and it's already this way, and you have to have evidence. So I'm not necessarily knocking it. I guess I am, but it takes time to change these things. So why is it 200 or 300 at Penn State? I have no idea. It's probably an ag grandfathered in sort of nutrient recommendation that simply hasn't been changed for whatever reason. I don't know, but it takes time to change those things in academia.
Well, I think that's a perfect thing too, is to say, all right, that's a perfect example of things that just get perpetuated over a period of time, right?
Yeah.
Back to your paper, what is some of the data you gathered here that you feel like has been grandfathered to? Yes, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Let me. He can bring it up or bring it up. There's a couple things I wanted to point out real quick. So bring up that paper back again, JPink. I guess that same table 10. I want to go over table 10 and table 13 before. I don't know when is this? When we shut this thing down? I don't know.
Whenever you want.
Okay, we might be here all night.
Sometimes we
basically
have been here till 2 in the morning.
This is the first table, as far as I'm aware. I'm going to pat myself on the back a little bit here. This is the first table, as far as I'm aware, of its kind anywhere in the world, as far as I know. I've never seen anything like this, and I fought and fought and fought to get this included. And I can't just ask this question in a survey. There's a committee that I'm a part of, and we have to agree we're going to ask this question and so forth. So it takes time, and there's good reasons why questions are excluded and so forth. But I wanted this question in. I didn't expect this result. Completely blindsided by this result. I would have just put money that Malik 3 would have been north of 50-60%. I thought it would have been, that would have been one, but I was wrong. So so this is critical, and hopefully this will help guide us in terms of educators to knowing, hey, wait a second, we're not doing something right here. I mean, this is, I use the analogy in Orlando. Have you guys ever heard of or investigated flat earth people, flat earth belief? I went to a flat earth conference in Dallas, Texas in 2019. $350 to get in, and there was like 600 people there. The best conference I ever went to in my life. It was astounding. And at that conference, I'm standing next to a highway patrolman outside in the hallway, and these people are out there wearing hats and all sorts of alien stuff. All sorts of stuff. And I was telling him, I was like, "What do you think about this?" And he's like, "I'm not here to judge anybody. I'm just here to keep the peace." And And I said, and he goes, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I'm in academia, and I'm here because it's sad. I'm depressed. I think academia has failed these people somewhere along the line. We dropped the ball. I think either high school or college or something, somewhere along the line, academia has failed." And he goes, he looked at me. He goes, "I think you're thinking about this too much." And I go, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, I've been a police officer for 20 years. And part of my job is to read people. That's how we stay healthy and alive. I got to read people." He goes, "I'm telling you right now, half the people in this building are high." And I was like, oh my gosh. And I go, okay, fair enough. Okay. I'm not saying half the people soil testing are high. I'm just saying I still believe that academia has failed these people who have been convinced that this saturated paste. It breaks my heart to see this number. I've spent a great deal of my life educating superintendents and turf managers on the value and how to use these things. And to see that number, it just really breaks my heart to see these numbers this high on a test that
kind of
has
sickening. Yeah,
has no evidence. Yeah, it's so sad. And I just so I just wanted to point that out, is that now we know the number's there. It sucks. My baby's ugly, tough. I got to deal with it now. But now at least we know where we are, and as educators, we can hopefully help design our programs to help address this issue. I think it's an area it's an opportunity for improvement, is what it is. Okay, so I want to talk about that, and then table 13. JPink, I think it's table 13. Okay, so table 13. What I've done here is I've highlighted in red and other ones in green, and the green highlights are values that are associated with reductions in nutrient usage. So, what we're looking at here is the association between management practices used with the intent of reducing reliance upon nutrients. So the superintendent was asked this question and said, okay, I fertilize based on soil test results with the intent of reducing reliance on nitrogen, phosphorus, and so forth. And what we find is the association is inverted. We find the association actually is greater if they're using, so it says, was management practice used, yes or no? And we find that more people are applying nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium if they're soil testing. Now, we know there's not yet commercially available a soil test to test for nitrogen. I mean, they're there, but they're not really commercially available. So it's very likely that this association is probably not like I'm looking at a soil test and I'm going to apply more nitrogen or I'm going to apply more phosphorus. It's probably not that, but there is an association here that we need to explore further to figure out what's going on. Okay, and so the same thing goes with all the other red ones. So, for example, changed turf cultivar. Okay, we changed turf cultivar. There's an association with that and applying more nitrogen. There's an association with that and applying more potassium. It kind of makes sense. There's an association there. So we can go through that. But the green ones are what I want to highlight as well. There's an association between returning clippings, using precision applicator, you can go down the list there, and applying less phosphorus. There's an association between reducing turf acres and applying less potassium and phosphorus. And so these are what I would refer to as risk factors or management factors that can be considered whenever someone's interested in actually, potentially reducing phosphorus. Again, I'm not saying that this management practice results in that. That's not what this is saying. This is simply saying there's an association here. It's the same thing as heart disease. So if you smoke and you're overweight, you have a greater risk of heart disease. If you smoke, there's a greater risk of lung cancer. And I used this analogy the other day. I mean, Keith Richards, he literally looks like a walking dead lung. He's been smoking for 60 years and he didn't have cancer apparently. So you can't say smoking causes lung cancer. All we can say is smoking is associated with an increased risk in lung cancer, right? It's the same thing here. I'm not saying the management practice causes these things, but there's an association here. So if you're considering reducing, hey, we got to reduce our phosphorus applications. Well, return clippings, use precision fertilizer, avoid fertilizing based on soil test results, go down the list and you can adjust your management practices and potentially, increase the probability of applying less phosphorus that's kind of how to read this. Okay. These are essentially kind of risk factors for nutrient applications if you look at it that way. But I just want to make that clear. It doesn't mean the management practice causes that. It's just there's a positive association there. Okay.
And I think your point about has academia failed here? Could that also apply to this too? Is that not enough emphasis is placed on returning clippings, using precision fertilizer, reducing turf acreage?
Yeah,
And
good question again.
I'll combine that with the idea too, is that is it another example also of fertilizing based on soil test results, is that we're applying for fertility methodologies that aren't necessarily evidence-based, right? So should we all be be fertilizing according to SLAN? Should we be using what's the where you're doing all your ratios, the magic ratios? Albrecht, I'm drawing a blank.
Oh,
on,
base cation saturation.
Yeah,
BCSR.
BCSR.
Oh, yeah. So let's open
Another
up that
keyword.
one.
Yeah.
Since you brought it up, let's open up that PowerPoint again, JPink, with there's a bar chart on there. So we don't have a whole lot of evidence in turfgrass. Now, this is fun right here. We don't have a lot of evidence in turfgrass. Well, we don't have this. We have evidence in turfgrass on putting greens and so forth, but not this specific sort of comparison. And what we're looking at here is these colored bars are soil tests that were sent to lab 1, 2, 3, and 4, where the soil testing lab interpreted the results through the build up and maintain philosophy, where you're feeding the soil, you're throwing nutrients into the soil to reach a certain value, or the base cation saturation, where you're trying to balance the soil. And then lab, the blue one, it says university lab, that's used the SLAN method. And then we had non-treated. And we don't have this specific sort of thing in turf. I'm desperate to kind of get a study like this going, where we're looking at all these different soil test interpretations on turf over many years and seeing what happens with the cost and the nutrient applications. But basically, what this says is that the base cation saturation and the build up and maintain methods are resulting in greater nutrients applied, greater cost to do this, but the yield in this case is identical. Okay, the yield, this was corn done in 1986. It's cut off there, but this was done in 1986. This was an 8-year study, by the way, 8 years. And the yield was identical, whether you bought all these nutrients and spent all this money or you followed the SLAN method, the yield was identical. And what happens, I think, and I don't know this to be sure, but what happens, I'm convinced of, is that the green bar on the far right is the non-treated. Okay. And when someone goes out and does base cation saturation and follows that methodology, you can see there's a response from non-treated. Okay. I don't know if anybody's going to argue that. You're going to see a response from a non-treated turf plot, or in this case, corn field. But as scientists, we're not arguing that. Clearly, you're going to see a response if you do nothing at all. What we're saying is you don't need to do all that extra stuff. You can just follow the SLAN method, or preferably if you have a correlation and calibration done on these elements in your state, that would be more accurate, which is probably even lower than the SLAN. I know it is in my case. Then you can just follow those. Okay, so this base cation idea is completely hogwash. Build up and maintain is complete nonsense. There's no evidence to support this at all. The evidence that people usually bring up is flawed. They don't even realize it, but it's flawed. And if you understand it, you can understand why it's flawed. Then you understand it really well if you understand why it's flawed. So, make a long story short is, use the SLAN method, preferably if you're using numbers from your soils and your states, which is probably pretty limited. That would be even lower than the SLAN method. And if you don't have those values, and you don't have SLAN values, then what I would recommend is to follow the MLSN values, because what's resulting is that I've mentioned this before. I'm not completely condoning the MLSN, but what I am in complete agreement with is what the result is. And that is, people are generally applying nutrients more in line with what the turf grass actually requires. Okay, then if they follow the base cation or maintenance, or even SLAN values are usually quite a bit higher than the MLSN.
Sure.
So, if as long as we're applying nutrients and more in line with what we need, and the turf grass needs, then I'm fine. It's one of those things. The means to the end it's important, but in this case, I'd rather see them just cut to the end and get it right, and then we'll figure out how we got there later.
Yeah. So with MLSN, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. That when I read this paper, I don't know. I'm probably interjecting a lot of my own emotion here. Is that me personally, I have a fear over the long term pressure on the turfgrass industry as a whole, right? Whether that be through water usage or for fertilizer runoff, whatever the case may be. And I think what this demonstrates is another data set that we can use to show things that are going to result in fewer inputs, generating acceptable levels or practices that can help help us use less inputs overall, right? So we can help avoid contributing to the problem. So between SLAN and MLSN, would you agree in that same instance? And you mentioned SLAN, but would you think MLSN would be a better starting point for doing so, considering that the values there are going to be significantly lower?
Yeah.
And we at least
Sure.
do have evidence there that shows, and I'm not a student of it by any stretch of means of the imagination. I'm sure you're not either, but like one of the things I remember specifically about that was Micah's work on potassium, and was showing where deficiencies began arising, right? And I think the
Yeah.
very first deficiency symptom was detected like 50 parts per million, and then began increasing as you work your way down. And then, obviously it was somewhere around like 30 where it became really obvious. And then it wasn't 100% that you were guaranteed to experience it until even lower than that. So given that, and we'll use that as a piece of evidence to validate MLSN. Do you think MLSN is a better starting point than SLAN?
Well, yeah.
Okay. That was a really long-winded question.
Yeah. I mean, SLAN, the values are almost always higher than MLSN. Each time we've done a correlation and a evidence, a proper correlation and calibration with phosphorus or potassium or magnesium, or now I'm doing sulfur. You can throw the sulfur slides up there if you want. Each time we've done that, the numbers aren't what MLSN is. Okay. They're not identical to MLSN, but they're much closer than the SLAN numbers. So in other words, what I'm saying is the numbers that we have a great deal of confidence in are much lower than SLAN. Some of them are lower than MLSN. Some of them are higher than MLSN. But both MLSN and actual, I would say, correlated and calibrated numbers, both of those values, generally speaking, are in close proximity to each other. They're not that far off. So yeah.
With let's talk a little bit about your sulfur. Actually, Demay, I know you had a host of questions too. So
go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, you had to deal with
Ray and Matt have been dominating the day.
No, I know. I've had to step away a couple times. No big deal. So, so going back to, I guess the paper in general, right, is, we talked about the assistance teaching. This is an interesting point, sort of this passed down on the job training knowledge, right, that gets passed down. So I'm just curious, and then maybe this paper highlights it a little bit more clearly than it was previously understood, but how do we market and get the word out, right? If research is the function, right, then the next step, right, automatically becomes extension. And I know that is your appointment, right, at UK, and it's been in the past, right? So what is the barrier in your mind, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be your barrier, but just in general and turf grass specifically, and even golf courses more specifically too.
Yeah.
What's the barrier there to getting extension to be more widely adopted?
Yeah, good question. One, maybe we should back all the way up to the beginning of the conversation today.
Yeah,
one,
sure.
You realize the University of Kentucky no longer has a turf program, right? The turf program in Kentucky
why?
is gone.
Can you say why?
Well, I could if I knew. It was just a weird sort of bad timing thing with Dr. Munshaw exploring other options outside of UK, and he just wanted to take him and his family in a different direction at the exact same time COVID hit. And why they chose to cut it, you'd have to ask the dean and the chair of the plant soil science department why they chose to cut it. But I'm not working with UK. None. I'm done. I'm finished.
Right.
So
I meant your previous appointment. So
okay, I just want to make sure that's clear. I'm not associated with UK or UF or GCSA or anybody. I'm my own person.
Right.
University of Tennessee is calling you, by the way.
They're calling me.
Yeah, go Vols.
Yes. Vols. Yes.
Okay, so what the question was? Ryan, help me out.
What are the barriers to adoption?
The barriers. So here's how. Here's in a nutshell how academia. Well, I'm not going to say how it works, but this is sort of the world of an assistant professor, even a full professor, is that professors function on T&P, tenure and promotion. Okay. T&P is the process where they're evaluated on their activities. And whether you're teaching, professors have teaching, research, and extension, and some have administrative responsibilities, but it's usually 1 or 2 or 5% or something administrative. But it's teaching, research, and extension. I don't care if you're 100% teaching, okay? You're still going to be judged on 3 things: grants, grad students, and publications. It's that simple. Okay? If you're 100% extension, you're going to be judged on grants, grad students, and publications. That's what administrators want to see. So in the world of extension, your question was specific to extension. Why is it not out there? Why are we not doing a better job at it? I can't speak for academia. I'm not going to speak for academia. I can speak for me. Is that I felt 100% in your corner, Ryan, when I got to UF, because I lived the industry world for 10 or 15 years before I got to UF. And I was like, man, there's companies out there that are kicking our tail when it comes to getting in front of customers and getting in front of end users. And they're informing them sometimes of very good evidence-based practices. In other cases, they're indoctrinating them into other issues that are just bizarre. We got to do a better job. And so that's when Dr. Unruh and I developed the evidence. The whole evidence-based turfgrass management came from a dinner with me and my wife, when she said, she's talking about her world. And she goes, we have to follow evidence-based practices. I'm like, that's brilliant. Where'd you come up with that? So make a long story short is Dr. Unruh and I developed an extension program in Florida where he and I, along with a couple other faculty, there's other faculty involved, but he and I were the sort of the tip of the spear, where we were going out and we were dedicating serious time and resources to address that issue. Because I am with you 100%. It is a deficiency in academia, primarily, in my opinion, because it is not seen as a component of TMP to the same degree grants, grad students, and publications are. That's, in my opinion, why it is that way. But I said, forget that. We're doing this. And Dr. Unruh was with me 100% and was like, we're doing it. We were like a band going on a tour. We had like 6 or 7 stops around Florida, and we were staying in hotels and giving talks to 200 people at a time. It was great. We were doing really, really good things. In fact, we won a extension award. I forget what the award was. We won some sort of regional award for the program and what we were doing. And but that's what I did to address that deficiency, Ryan. Is that it's a serious problem. Like I said for years, research without publication is a hobby. And we don't move the needle with hobbies, and research without extension is a hobby, basically. I mean, you've got to get the word out to people that can use the information. We're not doing research in a vacuum. Okay. I'd love to sit in my basement. I got 15 ideas to do. No one's going to fund them. They're of no value to anybody other than me. No one's going to use it. It's useless. Okay. So we've got to do good research and realize this, at the end of the day, has to be implemented. It has to be applied to people that can use it. And that means you got to get out of your office and your lab and get out on the extension tour and start talking to people and getting these people to understand, these are evidence-based practices where if you follow them, you're very likely to either to make more money, provide the same product with less money, or provide the same product with less environmental impact, basically is what it is.
So let me ask this. IP materials. I want to go back to the funding thing in a second here, but on that note, the road show, right? Yeah. That you guys went on. How much of that do you think catalyzed the movement towards, what really became the first BMP, or best management practices manual, right, in Florida for their chapter of the GCSA?
Oh yeah, that was done ages before this. That was done a decade ago. And it turned, the manual that exists now was just the updated version of the BMP manual. Florida was the first state, as far as I know, to create a golf BMP manual. But that was done ages ago, I think, by Dr. Elliott, Dr. Unruh, and can't remember. He'll know. Dr. Unruh was intimately involved with all that development. But that was done ages and ages ago, and it served as a template to what is now a BMP for every state in golf. So, but it had nothing to do with the extension that we were doing, as far as I know.
Okay, I was just curious on that piece. So, all right. So on the funding piece, certainly a lack of dollars that exist out there in the world to study issues that are pertinent, right, to real world challenges, right, that turfgrass managers have, and
Yeah.
real world challenges that are perceived that of issues that we create, whether they're fair or unfair, right? So related to water quality, like you said, environmental sensitivity, things of that nature, right? So I guess what is the path forward, right? If you were to if you were president of the turf researchers for a day, right? How would you
Yeah.
set the course for everybody to maybe fall in line and study things that really mattered, right? What would those things be? What would your priorities be?
We
Yeah,
sit
just
around and
it's
talk
hey,
about
you
this
wanted
stuff
it, you
all the
wanted us
time.
to. Well, you wanted us. We played the
Yeah.
let's play the theoretical game or the
Yeah,
hypothetical
no, I
game,
mean,
right?
we scientists and professors sit around and talk about this all this stuff. It's like, why in the hell would they fund that project? Why what do they do?
Let me ask you this: what's your
must
best
have some
project that
photos
didn't get
stashed
funded?
somewhere.
What
Which
was
of
the
my
best
projects?
project you thought you had that you were in love with yourself but didn't get funded?
I had a project that I sent, I'll leave the associations out of it, where I sent, had 3 or 4 universities sign on to this, and we were going to do a sod project that looked at basically I think I have to pull up the proposal again. I don't remember the details of it. I think it was. I have to pull up. I'm gonna get this wrong. I apologize, but it had to do with soil testing philosophies, and I wanted to look at sod. I wanted to do it on a sod farm because the agency was dealing with sod production, and I had the sod producers blessing on it, and they're uh, um, I don't know if he's not the president, but their research person there, Dr. Reynolds. He was 100% on board, and they shot it down. But people don't do research on the research, and you guys have been very, very flattering and very, very nice to me tonight and talking about my work and so forth. And I appreciate that. But you have to keep in mind the ironwork, soils, this ironwork on tissue, the nitrogen rate, the nitrogen cost
Yeah.
work that we've done, these practical studies, all that was funded by me. None of that was funded by any
What?
agency at all. None of that was
What?
funded by anybody.
Oh my
But
It was
like you
funded- it
personally
was-
did, or you went and found the money?
No. So not me and my wife. No. What I'm
Okay.
saying
No.
is, well, the sulfur study is being funded by me and my wife, but because no one's paying me for that. But
Okay.
what happens is you end up, say you get a grant, say you get a water management grant, or you get a federal grant or whatever. Well, the federal grant wouldn't work. Some grants from private industry grants or whatever, and you're going to do it for $10,000 or $5,000, whatever the case is. And you do the work, and it doesn't cost you $10,000. It costs you $6,000 or $7,000. This is private sort of donation money. Well, you have some money left over, and that starts to build up. And from those funds, you're able to kind of do what you really want to do, right? You got to kind of do this work over here to get the money to come in, and hopefully you can't do it with state or federal grants. It'd be against the law.
Soft
to take
money,
that
right?
back. But yeah, soft money. So you have somebody coming in, you have a little war chest built up. You say, hey, I got 50 grand. I'm going to hire a graduate student, and we're going to look at this study, because you can't get. Well, I have had very little success getting anybody to fund, hey, we're going to do a nutrient calibration study on phosphorus on bluegrass to, see what the soil testing value should be. That's just not sexy. No one
How is that
cares
not
about
sexy? That
I
is
don't know.
that is the sex.
that. I know. To me, it's number one. I mean, I'm a nutritionist, but I'm not saying the other,
it
the
is
other
super
studies
important.
aren't. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in the other studies, maybe they're all important. They just take a higher priority. Maybe they. I don't know.
I don't think so.
I'm not,
Do they
I
though?
don't think so, Doctor.
Do
don't
they?
know.
No, I don't think so, Dr. Shaddox, because phosphorus restrictions are like the number one thing. Okay, that is like the
Yeah.
number one thing, and for me personally,
Yeah.
something like that can become a very sore subject. And you know why it becomes a sore subject to me, Dr. Shaddox?
Why is that?
Because
Did you live on an island?
goddamn numbers, no, because the goddamn numbers don't correlate with
Yeah,
what
well,
I'm
that's true.
seeing right before my
Yeah.
eyes.
Yeah.
And when a number overrules what 3 decades of education and observation
Yeah.
have shown me, then we got a
Yeah.
serious damn problem. And
Yeah.
I need a qualified person to sort this out and
Yeah.
straighten things out.
Well, you
I need
do
a-
bring up a good
I-
point, though. It's sort of a secondary point to what you're talking about, Ray, is that they're not. I don't want to read funders' minds and whatever. I'm mostly retired now, so I can offend whoever I want. I guess it's not going to bother me. But
Go ahead,
I don't have,
offend. That's what this show
I don't have
does,
FU
sir.
money or anything like that. But but regardless, but people aren't going to generally fund work that they don't realize there's a problem that it's trying to fix. So if you have annual bluegrass resistance to herbicides and there's bluegrass everywhere and everybody's raising hell over it, then there's a problem. That problem's very obvious. There's like, hey, there's a huge problem, and they're gonna, it's on the forefront, right? But I just don't know. I think I'm convinced that the funders and the general public just don't realize that the soil test
How
values
serious is
are
it?
mostly
serious.
meaningless. Yeah, I don't think they
Yeah, this
realize.
is
I don't want to say
serious.
that. I shouldn't say that because someone's going to quote me and I'm going to get taken out of context. I mean, but generally with phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, in general, those values don't mean much on a soil test. To me, well, the values. That's not true. The values do mean something. It's just the recommendation to apply fertilizer beyond that is like, it's highly questionable. Highly questionable.
I think it's extremely fair, and I think the lack of consistency and unity, and the fact that depending on who you talk to, where you go, all these various fertility recommendations, I
Yeah.
cannot wrap my mind around how wildly different it varies from
Yeah.
region to region, state to state, city to city.
Well,
It's
it-
just
it- the-
bizarre.
Yeah, well, the critical ranges should vary. I mean, to some degree, they should vary. It's the
Between-
recommendations that vary. Like, I don't know where they pull these things out of their ass or something. I don't know where they pull these recommendations out of. But I know how hard it is to get a calibration study done and to know, okay, I have confidence. This is the best. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes seasons, and
Talk about
takes
that.
work.
How would
about it?
one set up? How would one set up? What does a calibration study look like? Explain that if you could to
pull
our
up the,
audience.
pull up
That's
the
great.
PowerPoint slide. You guys are just hitting on all cylinders tonight. You guys hitting on all my favorite subjects. Go to the very end with the sulfur.
That's what we do. That's
So yeah, so let's cut to the next slide. I kind of skipped that. Go to the next one. So this is a calibration study. This is what a calibration study looks like. Okay, this particular picture I just put out because I happened to be there that day. But this study is on bluegrass here, just maybe 3 or 4 miles away from my house. And what I determined through this process from the previous slide, actually, you know what? Oh, screw it. Go back to the previous slide. I guess we're not going to. They're not. YouTube's.
We'll
not
fix it
gonna
in
cut us off.
post.
So the okay, these squares here were sent to me from a saw producer, and he said, "Hey, I got some problem out here. I think I got a deficiency in something." And he sent me this. I'm like, I'm applying urea and not seeing a response. I'm like, well, okay, that's bizarre. So I went out there and I saw these, and he goes, "I think I have a magnesium deficiency." And you can look at this and see why he believed that. I mean, I believe
I'm
it's
going
what
to
he said.
disagree that it has a magnesium deficiency, Dr. Shaddox. I'm going to
Well,
disagree.
Okay, well,
And you
you're
know
right.
why?
Just hold your horses there. Hold your.
I
You're
won't
right.
spoil it
Okay.
for y'all.
But what I'm saying
I
is,
won't
when you
spoil it
look
for
at
y'all.
this, all 3 of these have magnesium in them, and the urea is
Mhm.
not green, right? And so I was like, okay, well, let's figure this out. So I started looking at all this stuff. Make a long story short is, I'm trying to diagnose a turfgrass problem, and so I was like, let's look at your soil. I almost never ask for that. Okay, I mean, I almost never ask for a soil test. And I was like, something's not right here because this magnesium isn't going to do this. Okay, I'm sorry. Potassium isn't going to do this. All right, and it's not going to happen. I mean, maybe in some planet somewhere in another galaxy where the rules of reality don't exist or something. I don't know, but it's not going to happen here. And so we took a soil test, and I know from row crops that the sulfur level should be somewhere around 7 or 6 or something like that, maybe around 10. But you have to ask for a soil analysis. They don't normally give you one on a soil test. And so when I got that, it came back at like 4 or 3. I can't remember the number. I'm like, well,
my
I
goodness.
doubt that's the case, but it could be the case. And so I went out on the next slide, JPink. So we move it. I went out and I did this. And the only way you can determine, well, one of the best ways you can determine if it's sulfur is to go out with potassium sulfate or calcium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, whatever, and see if you see a response that's similar to nitrogen, because that's what it is. You're having a nitrogen deficiency is what it is. The nitrogen's there. The plant can't metabolize it because there's no sulfur. And so the way I have to confirm this in science is I can't just put out potassium sulfate. I have to put out potassium sulfate and something else to ensure that it's not the potassium. So I had to put out potassium chloride. So now these two sources have exactly the same amount of potassium, but there's a difference. So that tells me it, and then between the control and the potassium chloride plot are identical. So it tells me there's a very good probability that's a sulfur deficiency. And this, I did that prior to this study. And then once I determined, okay, it's probably sulfur, I jumped on that like a duck on a June bug. I was just like, I got to get on this because this almost never happens. And so I was like, please don't fertilize the field. Please don't. This is on a sod farm. Like, please don't fertilize this. I'm begging him because I got to do. So I ran it. He goes, no, I won't fertilize it. So I ran out there. I got one more run I got to do in the spring, but and I jumped on it, put it out, and I'm like, sure as shit. I was like, man, that's a sulfur deficiency. And I did different rates. So this 35 pounds per acre. There's another plot out here. I can't remember the rates now. I did it in kilograms, but it's 10 kilograms, 20 kilograms, 30 kilograms, 40 kilograms of potassium per acre. I don't know what this is, 35 pounds per acre. But
40 would be like 100, right? Yeah, so close to it.
Yeah, something like that. So I went out and you do a calibration. You determine at what point do you get the turf grass to become acceptable, right? And whatever that point is, I didn't send you that graph, JPink, but whatever that point is where the turf crosses the acceptable limit, which is usually 6, then you can back calculate what the soil test level should be, right? That's how we do a calibration. So now I know the soil test critical level is X, and because I use multiple amounts of potassium, I'm able to then determine through a formula how much potassium I actually needed to apply to achieve that acceptable quality result. It ended up being 60 pounds per acre of SOP. So
Okay.
11 pounds of sulfur and 60 pounds of SOP per acre to do that. So that's how we do a
And-
calibration.
All right.
We use
It's interesting.
multiple amounts we use multiple amounts of an element, and then we figure out a curve that we see hopefully we see a response curve, and that curve plateaus out. And where that plateaus out, we back it up to where it crosses acceptable limits, and then that's where the number is, and that's how a calibration is conducted. Sorry, Ray, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Oh no problem. Because what I saw, with that slide before this is to my eyes, Dr. Shaddox, this is classical sulfur.
Yeah.
Classical.
Well, it is. You're right.
Okay,
You're absolutely
classical
right. Yeah.
sulfur. And do you know why to me that's classical sulfur?
Go ahead.
Failure for it to respond to urea.
Yeah, well,
It's
you're absolutely
already-
right. You're dead on.
and
you're
do you know
absolutely
why
100% correct. Yeah.
You know why we're saying failure to respond to urea?
Yeah.
We on this show, between Matt, Ryan, and I,
Uh-huh.
oftentimes our preferred nitrogen source is actually AMS 2100 ammonium sulfate.
There you go. Yeah.
And
And
the reason why is because if some of your N is coming from AMS, you are not going to see a sulfur deficiency, versus if somebody
that's
is
true.
exclusively using urea as their N source, and
Mhm.
they do have low pre-existing S in their soil, this is
Yeah.
going to come up. This is probably gonna come
Absolutely.
up.
Yeah. So on your point, Ray, if I can just emphasize your point, and that is,
Mhm.
if you apply urea, and this goes for everybody watching YouTube now and
Mhm.
50 years from now, okay? If you apply
Mhm.
urea to turf and you don't see a
don't-
response, don't put more, okay?
Thank you.
You don't
Say
have a
it
nitrogen
louder.
deficiency problem.
Say it louder for the folks in the back.
Yeah.
Maybe it's locked up.
applying more isn't going to help, okay? It's going to hurt. You will almost always see a response to applying urea, almost always. So if you don't, you got something else going on. Don't apply more. And it's a key example and an indicator, I should say, of a sulfur deficiency. And in general, these blended fertilizers, you're not going to see this because they have all this other junk in there. Well, it just so happens that some of that junk has sulfur. Okay, and you're applying sulfur, and you think it. Back it up to go to the next slide over, the one before. I'm sorry, the one down. I'm sorry, down. Sorry, Jay, I misspoke. Jay. The next one. Now, see, if you apply potassium sulfate and you don't apply potassium chloride, this is how people become convinced that it's from the potassium. I applied potassium sulfate and I saw a response.
Yeah.
Of course, you saw a response to potassium sulfate, but you don't know if it's from the potassium, right? I've been in this business for a long time, and I have never once seen a beneficial response to applying potassium. not once.
So if I have a 007 coated in a 0.37% load of prodiamine, and I go apply that as my spring pre-emergent, you mean to tell me that's not going to make my grass turn green once it warms up outside?
Not unless the K comes from SOP and you have a sulfur deficiency.
Interesting. Fascinating.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
know,
learn that.
this is
potassium-
just
Go ahead.
yeah, potassium is not an element that I've associated with discoloration in turf. I mean, what I've seen out of actual potassium deficiency is maybe I see tip burn, but
Well, yeah.
turf always remains green. It always remains green, so it doesn't turn fluorescent yellow from a
Hmm.
lack of potassium, for example. Never.
Well,
Not yet.
I will say the only known documented case that I'm aware of was the Snyder Cesar paper, where at my old facility before I took over, they did a study down there, and I have the privilege of knowing George fairly well, and he and I were talking one day, and he said, I said, man, that paper's awesome. It's the nitrogen potassium ratio paper they did. The paper's great, you know. He goes, yeah, it was done right here, and we're standing on the plots, and I go, yeah, I use it all the time. And he's like, and we started talking about it. He said, in order to get that response, I said, I've never seen a response to potassium. He goes, well, neither did I. But he goes, we did this for a year and we couldn't find any response to it. We had to leach this through. We're dealing with sands and basically beach sand in Fort Lauderdale. We had to leach this through, grow the turf out, collect the clippings for a year. We had to remove the clippings, really leach it and get the potassium in the soil low enough in order to actually see a response when we applied it. And so it can happen. I'm not here to say it won't happen. But it is very, very rare to see a response to applied potassium, at least in the field. But this is, the reason I'm showing this slide, JPink, thanks for leaving it up here, is because this is, in my opinion, why more and more people will become convinced that it's the potassium, because they're seeing a response to SOP more now than they did 5 or 10 years ago when the sulfur emissions were greater. The sulfur emissions have been reduced in the United States over the last 20 or 30 years. And so the sulfur deposits in the soil are much less. So sulfur deficiencies are much greater. And so we're going to be seeing responses to sulfur, in my opinion, over the next 10 or 15 years become even more common. And you're going to be seeing people, I hope not now, but you're going to be seeing people, I think, unfortunately, become convinced that it's the potassium, when in fact it's probably a sulfur response. You're applying two macro elements here, potassium and sulfur. I get a kick out of people who apply, zinc sulfate and you're applying a micronutrient with a macronutrient. You think you're getting a response from the zinc? I mean, come on, let's think about this for a second.
Well, it depends on who you ask, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So anyway, this is an example of how we can be fooled. A human mind is very easily fooled. Okay. And as a superintendent, why wouldn't you believe it's a potassium sulfate? You applied it and you saw a response, right? I would probably think it's potassium too. In fact, I did think it was something else until I went out and I had to do this 3 times. I'm standing out there with the top producer and I'm shaking my head going, this can't be. This can't be. And he's like, it be. It just doesn't make sense where you'd have a sulfur deficiency this pronounced. And I was like, it shouldn't happen, but it does.
But you know what, Dr. Shaddox? The way I would have teased this out fast without confounding it with magnesium and potassium is I would have just put down 1/10 of a pound of N from ammonium sulfate and watch what happened.
Yeah, that would do it. That would do it too.
Because for me, it's like well known among even the casual turfgrass people that the kind of green that you get from ammonium sulfate is a little bit different from the kind of green that you can get from urea. It's a little bit different.
Yeah. We can talk about why that is, but I can tell you right now, I don't know the answer to that question.
No,
I don't know if it's from lowering the pH. I don't know if it's from the sulfate.
No,
I don't know.
It's also because of the additional sulfur, and you said something very important, because with all of the EPA restrictions on various industrial and automotive emissions, the amount of sulfur in the environment has been lowered because sulfur is one of the target pollutants.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It's like So with it not coming out of the sky, then it's no longer going into the soil. So it makes sense
You
to
hear
me,
that?
you know.
You hear that, boys? All those meth heads that are stealing the catalytic converters, they're turf lovers too. All right, so don't hate on them.
Yeah.
All right.
It is going to be more of an issue. Sulfur deficiency is going to be more of an issue. Generally, you won't run into that if you're using a blended fertilizer. I don't recommend blended fertilizers, but it just so happens that you probably have a sulfate form in there somewhere that you might actually find some value in that. But I would be very cautious about what you are convinced is actually causing the response. Unless you've properly balanced everything out, it would be very difficult to know for sure. So,
Let me ask this real
my
quick,
opinion.
because we've got about 10, 12 minutes here before we've got to wrap it up. We've got
Okay.
being business owners. We got some early days, and I want to, before I even start these, I want to extend the offer to come back on here whenever you'd like.
Okay.
This has been
Sure.
an excellent conversation. We could literally,
I got
probably
like
should
100
start
more
it.
questions.
Yeah, we could literally start, I think, next time at 9 a.m. and we'll see if we can make it to 9 p.m. We'll just see if we can do a 12-hour shift. You know, maybe do a double.
Well, I was telling Matt on the phone. I spoke briefly before I decided to go ahead and come on. I wanted to just chit chat with him, and I told him, it's like, I could talk about this till all your audience is asleep and no one's. I mean, no one's. I mean, it's just
not our guys, not our
I'm not
audience.
a normal.
That's not.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm a
It's
normal
not-
person or not, but I
did
don't know why I'm
learn
interested in
two non-turf related things tonight that I thought were important. I want to make sure I hit these before we ask these final questions. To be number one, while smoking, can increase your risk of lung cancer. Based on your observations of Keith Richards, I would say that groupies will reduce the risk of lung cancer as well. So there's that. And I've also I learned that an appropriate value for Dr. Shaddox to place on excellent people watching, top-notch people watching, is $350 and a trip to Dallas, Texas. So those are important. Those are important data points that I need to have to really size him up, just like that.
Real quick, before I forget, guys, I'm not, and I'll let you ask your last two questions. Before I forget, you can actually go on YouTube and Google Jimmy Kimmel Flat Earth, and there'll be about a 5 or 6 minute video pop up, and you will see me in that video 3 or 4 times, but you will actually see me in that video talking to that police officer in the background.
I'm gonna watch this.
Everybody's algorithm, RIP to everybody's YouTube algorithm, because it's going to just blow you up with all sorts of conspiracy theorist stuff. So yeah. All right. So real quick, I think the one thing, and I know we could talk longer about this, but just, give me your 30,000 foot view, and I'd love to dive into this with another segment. I know that you're not a physiologist. I know that you're, technically not a turf guy, but where do you see the advantages in the future of using, technology to observe on turf, vigor, health, all that kind of stuff, right? We're looking for visual cues, right, to know that it's growing well, but certainly there are now, devices and technology that can help us do that better and maybe be a little bit more anticipatory. So where do you see that going, and how can people leverage that, at least at a professional level at this point?
Yeah. I was reviewing a paper here recently that used NDVI. I'm assuming you're talking about NDVI and DGCI.
Well, that's one of them. That's one that you could use. Yeah.
Yeah. To apply nitrogen, basically. But NDVI to apply nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm in the camp where I'm not convinced by a long stretch of the imagination that we should use objective measurements to place a value on a subjectively valued crop like turf.
Fair.
It's an aesthetic turf. It's an aesthetic plant. Sorry. It's subjectively valued. My neighbor, well, she's gone now. She sold her house, but before her, she was the happiest person in the neighborhood with her lawn, and it had about 20% turf and about 80% weeds in it. And she was as happy as a pig in slop. She was great with it. So the aesthetic value to her was at the top of the chart. To someone else, it was a weed farm, right? So we're going to put an NDVI or DCI or any of the technologies nowadays on this crop and give us a number plant and give us a number and say it should be this number. I'm not in that camp. I can be in that camp. I can definitely be convinced that is in the future possibly a tool we can use. But I'll just pick on NDVI since I just happened to put that. I was reading that paper this morning. Now, NDVI can be correlated with turf quality and performance. It can be, but it's notoriously poorly correlated. There's R squareds down to 0.3s. There's R squared in the 0.8s. Okay, but and until I have enough evidence to convince me that this particular instrument is giving me a value that is relatable in some way to what I'm seeing with my eye and what the customer, the homeowner, and the sport turf manager wants, I just don't know how far we can go with that. I haven't seen it yet. So, but I can be convinced. I mean, I just need to. I need to see numbers. I mean, you see an NDVI number, say an NDVI is 0.7. So what?
So what does that mean, right? Yeah, because at the end of the day, I always say that my business is literally dictated by that grumpy, hard to please person that's sitting outside looking out her kitchen window 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
and that person gives zero damns about a number. They don't care about
exactly.
numbers, right?
Exactly. Well, let's talk about the low hanging fruit here. Is that if you ran an NDVI or DGCI or any other instrument on the Super Bowl field, it would have been off the chart. Probably give you an NDVI value of 0.9 or something, 0.95. It would have been through the roof. But the performance, it looked great. Yeah, but the performance of the athletes was not acceptable to the athletes. I'm not going to get into the whole why it happens. I have no clue why it happened. I don't want to get down that rabbit hole because I don't know. But clearly, the athletes, at least on one team, it wasn't acceptable. It wasn't performing acceptable. So regardless of what if you can find an instrument that'll give me a value that would then tell me before the game, hey, this field's not going to be acceptable, then that's convincing to me. I'm like, whoa, well, let's look into it. Let's do something. But that's what it would take. All the instruments we currently have, I suspect, would have shown that field as being very acceptable, no problems whatsoever. But for whatever reason, God knows why, it didn't perform to the athlete's expectations. Is that fair to say?
No. I think it's fair to say, and I think that's why I think where. My opinion, I think where it's going to go is that it is an envelope, right, in which something needs to fit, right? So in terms of physical performance characteristics, right, there's a number of things that we would like to measure that we don't really have a good way to do right now, and I think you would probably find that if you really dug into some of the protocols related to just playability metrics and things like that, save for what the USGA just came out with at the show last week that you were at, right, the golf show, that looks interesting, right? I don't know that it'll be the end all be all, but it's a start. It's a start to take in.
Well, that's a very good point. Yeah, it's a very good point, Ryan. Is that the little, I don't know what they call it, the something 2 or something 3 or beacon 2, whatever it's called. Yeah, I think there's great potential there. I think there's great potential with NDVI and all these other things. I think there's potential there. We just need more ground truthing to convince someone like myself that the numbers are of any value in terms of predicting what's going to happen. These all have to be useful in terms of predicting and telling someone this is what you need to do, or this is what it should be, or whatever the case is. And so that ball might prove to be extremely valuable.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I agree, and I think the most important thing there, and this is what I'd love to talk to you about on our follow-up show, along with that, there's more in this paper to unpack, and there's several other papers that you've written I'd really like to talk about in greater depth.
Oh my God.
Really. No, truly, like no BS, no blown smoke. But I think that with the, with that modeling of data, right, it's going to take not only the ground truthing, but taking into account a whole host of other factors, right, that we don't take into account in research, right? That's hard to do. It's just simply too many data points to collect, right? So, with AI, with machine learning, with, some of the big data computing that we'll have access to, I think that's doable, and it can correlate those numbers better because a 5 on the Deacon scale in Des Moines, Iowa, and a 5 in Fort Lauderdale might not mean the same thing, right? even if you
Possibly, yeah.
normalize the crop, the weather, all that kind of stuff, which just is not going to happen. So, lots to unpack there too. But
Did you have one last one, or did you have? What did you have left?
my last question is: did you have fun? Was this enjoyable for you? Hopefully,
the GIS.
No.
Did you-
Here on the show, was this?
Oh
enjoyable?
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, guys. I mean, you have to understand. When I was little, I would sit and I would read fertilizer labels when I was like freaking 12 or 13. I was like, why am it's like what is isobutylidine diuretic? What in the heck is that word? I mean, it's like I would just read these things. Yeah, I don't know why, but and my wife, like I said, she is extremely successful in her area, but it's not turf. Okay, so I have no one to talk to about this stuff.
About
So
grass,
to have
okay.
people to have you three flatter me with your questions and your graciousness. I mean, to me it's very nice to be able to talk to someone about these subjects.
Well,
And
I can say. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm
No,
just saying.
you
I
go
just want to
ahead,
say thank you for having me on, and my intent is to pursue, as you mentioned earlier, Ryan, pursue other avenues of extension. I've never done this stuff before. I don't know what other professors have done this before. But when I was a professor, I'm freaking busy. Okay, dealing with grad students and committees, and I'm dealing with talks, and I'm always going. I mean, busy. I didn't stop and think, oh, most of our clientele are probably on YouTube now. We might want to have a platform on YouTube. I didn't stop about that. So I'm giving this a shot with the intention of hopefully reaching more people and hopefully making a positive impact on their programs, and we'll see what comes of it. But I had a great time. Yeah, absolutely.
That's good. I think for us, I mean, it's great to have somebody like you on, not only to give the platform to, and certainly our platform is tiny. It's nothing, right? But I think that the folks that do value this content are the folks that that you're ultimately trying to reach. The folks that are curious, the folks that do want to find a better way, and understand that science is never finished, right? It's a really ragged business that takes us in different ways and different turns and things like that, and it's okay, right, that
Sure.
we just try to get a little bit better each time, and tell all the people that have locked up nutrients and things like that where to go and what to do with them.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say this in closing is that I want to make, and I should have said this at the beginning. Everybody's probably gone by this point, but I want to point
No,
out
they're
just because I have 3 letters behind my name and I've been doing research for ages or whatever, it doesn't mean I'm right. Okay, I want to make sure that's clear. There's doctors,
Yeah.
there's people with high school degrees that are brilliant people. I'm like, my God, how do you know all this stuff? And there's people with PhDs that are as dumb as a box of rocks. Okay, so
Spicy.
it's a pretty good chance that someone with a PhD or professor is a pretty good chance on their area of specialty. They're probably correct on many things, but I don't want people to walk away with saying, "Oh, Dr. Shaddox said this, so it must be right." Don't do that. Okay, I'm wrong a lot. Okay, and I'm learning just like everybody else. I'm learning, and I would just ask everybody to consider that with everybody. Just because someone said it on a YouTube channel or a presentation at a turf conference, I wouldn't assume it's absolutely true. Let's ask. There's people. Well, if I give a talk and you hear me talking about weeds, Ryan, I can tell you right now, I'm probably wrong. So just go and talk to a weed specialist. Because hey, I heard Dr. Shack say there's people out there that specialize in these areas, and call them up and ask them. Hey, I heard something about locked up nutrients. Don't ask. Well, I'll use Dr. Munshaw since him and I are buddies, and he'll tell you. Don't ask Dr. Munshaw about that. He's not a soil scientist. Ask Dr. Munshaw about plants and seed development and all these other. I don't know anything about that, but he's very good at that stuff. So find their specialty and reach out to those folks who are specialists in those areas, and pick their brain a little bit. Don't just assume that what they said is correct simply because they have an advanced degree.
I think that's a great point, and I'll leave you with this. You said something at the beginning that struck me because I've taught just as an adjunct, not assistant professor, not a full professor. And when you said that the difference between being a PhD and being a professor are vastly different, and being a professor is much more difficult. Your last statement there reminded me of probably the most the professor at Ohio State that probably inspired me the most to learn and be curious and do all that stuff. And I remember the very first day of class, his statement to us, there was no syllabus. The syllabus was, I can write a test that you can fail, and you could write a test that I could fail. So let's respect each other's knowledge. Let's learn from each other, because everybody has something to learn from the person next to them, and let's go about our business. And I think that's
dead right. Absolutely right. I get really humbled every time I assume something about somebody, and I'm like, oh my God, I was completely wrong. And there's a story. I used to do a lot of extracurricular activities, particularly with martial arts and stuff like that. And I thought I was big and tough, and I was like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And here comes this. At the time, I was 25, and he was 51. Here comes this little bitty 155-pound, long-haired surfer hippie dude, comes in the dojo, and he's like, hey man, I'm 155 pounds, twisted steel and sex appeal, blah, blah, blah. He's just rattling off all these things. And I was like, who is this goofball?
Oh dear.
Blah, 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 and I had been competing for years, and blah, blah, blah. I thought I was tough. I'm like, come on, let's roll around. Da, da, da. Dude, I was weighing 200 pounds. I was fighting at 195, 200 pounds at a time. I was like, dude, wipe the floor with me. And I was like, oh my God, this guy is crazy.
Oops.
And for my thing, I was like, don't judge a book by its cover. These people who have advanced degrees, maybe they're brilliant, maybe they're not. People who have high school degrees, maybe they're brilliant, maybe they're not. Just be cautious. Don't assume anything. You could be dead wrong, and I was dead wrong in that case. And he and I are still buddies to this day.
Oh,
that's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Shaddox, thank you so much for coming on. Seriously, from the bottom of all our hearts, this has been absolutely.
This has been a real pleasure.
Great. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
You have a standing invitation. Go ahead.
I was going to say, you asked me if I enjoyed it, so you guys enjoyed it. I guess I don't have to.
Well, listen, if I didn't have to get up at 5 o'clock,
our private chat right now, like a lot of the people that are in the YouTube comments, we I'd say a lot, not all of them, but some of them. We have a private chat that's going on right now, and everybody's talking about how this is the best show we've ever done. So,
well, good, anyway, good for you,
legitimately,
guys.
and that's 400 and some odd hours of content, rolled in there. So that's a lot. And again, this is the kind of thing. Just people enjoy hearing from people that are inquisitive and people that are always searching for a better answer. And the one thing I was struck by, I think I even said it in the chat at one point, was that your questions are very precise, and usually that's a measure of somebody who's after the truth. So I appreciate that, and
I appreciate it too. I'll come back on and we'll talk about some nitrogen costs and nitrogen sources.
Yes,
and all sorts
of fun stuff. The fertilizer blending talk. I want to talk about that one. The nitrogen cost one's fun. The one that you put out last year.
Our favorite subject. I mean, that is our favorite subjects here, actually.
The nitrogen one? The nitrogen cost or blending?
The nitrogen cost.
Pretty good.
Yes.
Oh, really? Okay.
They're pretty good, but and then
there you go.
The funny thing is that prior to your work done on this, I've already arrived at, for my use case, I do better with instantly available end sources with what I'm doing.
Yeah. We'll go
instantly
down that
available
road.
wins for me.
We'll go down that road, and there's a whole interesting story behind that I want to be able to get at some point, where the slow release versus soluble. Again, one of those situations where I'm like, this can't be happening. This can't be happening. It's happening. This can't be true. It's true. Like I'm like,
we want to find all the trigger points. This is going to be your therapy session. We're going to tear all the band-aids up and cover all the wounds on your turfgrass soul.
Sorry, Dr. Shaddox, but
then dip me in nitric acid when we're done, because, well, damn it, I deserve it.
I figured that out for myself decades ago. Okay, I figured that out.
Can I get your phone number or something? Maybe I want to know what else. I want to know what else that you know that I don't know. I'm about to go do a 3-year study on that you already know the answer to.
Ray, I'm going to forward you Dr. Shaddox's contact information. I'll let you geek out on the next one.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
We've got to get out of here. We'll see everybody on Sunday. Y'all have a good one. Bye.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Love you guys.
Good night.